Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. The dashcam clock read 5:18 p.m. when the light first showed up, and I wouldn't have even noticed it if my buddy Jericho hadn't said, "Man, did you see that?" from the passenger seat. We were driving along Route 113 outside of Red Valley, that long stretch where the land rolls into low, dry hills and the only buildings are scattered barns and wind-worn fences. The sun was starting to dip, and the sky had that dusty orange look you get before dusk. It was still warm, still dry, the kind of quiet afternoon where you could drive for miles and barely pass another car. I'd had the dash cam running like always. My sister Lena had convinced me to install it after someone sideswiped her and took off last year. I never really thought much about it beyond forgetting to clear the SD card every few weeks. Jericho pointed toward the left side of the windshield, just past the low ridge line. I glanced over and saw a bright flare, like a sudden strip of white fire dropping down behind one of the hills. It moved fast, but not like a meteor. It dipped steadily, then vanished out of sight past the earth. "What was that?" I asked, slowing down without really thinking. "Looked like something falling," Jericho said, squinting at the horizon, "but no sound." I rolled the window down slightly. No crackle, no distant boom, no echo. Just dry air pushing past my face and the low hum of my tires on worn pavement. We kept driving, both of us quieter than before. Jericho kept craning his neck, like he expected something to rise back up. I caught a faint flash again about a minute later. Smaller this time, deeper behind the hills, like a dull flicker where it had gone down. Neither of us said anything. By the time we reached the Old Morales Farm Road turnoff, the sky had settled back into normal colors. We shrugged it off the way you do when something doesn't add up, but you don't want to make a big deal of it. We talked about grabbing food in town and forgot about the light. It wasn't until later that night, back at my place, that it started to bother me again. I'd dropped Jericho off and driven home alone, the road darker now with only the occasional ranch lights scattered in the distance. The quiet felt heavier than usual. Every time my headlights swept over a hill, I half expected to see that flare again. Inside, I made a sandwich and sat at my kitchen table scrolling through my phone. The image of that falling white streak kept replaying in my head, so I figured I might as well check the dash cam. I grabbed my laptop and popped the SD card in. The footage loaded fast. I skipped ahead to around the time it happened. 5:17 p.m., clear road, normal scenery. Then the timestamp rolled to 5:18. The screen suddenly went pure white. Not blur, not glare, just a blank, overexposed frame like someone had held a light directly against the lens. It stayed that way for a little over 3 seconds, then snapped back to normal road footage like nothing had happened. But there was no visible flare, no descending light, no streak, just white emptiness. I scrolled back and played it again. Same thing, normal road, then a bright wash of white. Then the dash cam returning to normal just in time to show the hill we'd been looking toward. My stomach dropped a little. I leaned closer to the screen, like that would somehow reveal something hidden in it. I adjusted contrast, replayed frame by frame. Nothing changed. The exact moment I remembered staring at that flare was replaced with blank brightness. I muted the laptop and sat back, suddenly aware of how quiet my house felt. I texted Jericho. "You remember that light we saw earlier?" He replied a minute later. "Yeah, weirdest thing." "Why?" I told him about the dashcam footage. He sent a single "huh," then followed it with a laughing emoji, probably trying to lighten it up, but I didn't feel like laughing. I shut the laptop and tried to distract myself with the TV, but every little creak in the house pulled my attention away. Around 11 p.m., I gave up and went outside onto my back porch to cool off. The night was clear but dry, with a soft breeze brushing across the fields behind my property. The moon hung low and pale. I looked out toward the same stretch of hills from earlier, barely visible in the distance. The air felt heavier somehow, not stormy, just dense. I stood there a long time, hands on the railing, listening to crickets and distant coyotes. Then, faintly, the same spot where the flare had dropped glowed again, barely visible, and a pale shimmer clinging to the horizon like a memory of light rather than actual brightness. It didn't fall this time. It just hovered low and dim for a few seconds before fading into the night. My chest tightened. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched. When the glow vanished, everything went dark again. Just fields, hills, and silence. Inside, I locked the door without really meaning to. I checked the dashcam again just to be sure. The footage still showed nothing but white where the flare should have been. The next morning, I drove out that way again, alone this time. The road felt different, even in broad daylight. Like I was passing through somewhere I wasn't supposed to see clearly. Nothing looked disturbed. No burn marks, no smoke, no strange debris, just dry earth and yellowed grass swaying lazily on the slope. I parked on the side of the road and stepped out, walking up the ridge a bit. The dirt was warm under my shoes. I scanned the ground for anything unusual and noticed a small patch where the grass had bent down in a circular shape, like something heavy had pressed there and lifted back off again. No footprints, no scraping, just flattened blades slowly trying to stand back upright. I stared at it until my neck started aching. When I got back into my car, my dash cam briefly flickered on and off, almost like it didn't want to be recording. I watched the hills one last time before driving home, half expecting that bright flare to return, but the sky stayed simple and ordinary. No streaks, no shimmer, just open space pretending nothing had ever happened. The radio cut to static right as my tires hit the start of the bridge, a sharp hiss that swallowed the soft country song I'd been half listening to. I tapped the volume knob out of habit, thinking I just drifted out of range again, but the static flattened into a low, steady hum. Not music, not talking, just one long, even tone. It was close to midnight, and I was crossing the old Callahan Bridge outside of Riverton, the one that stretched over Blackwater Creek and the marsh beyond it. There were no streetlights on that stretch, just my headlights and the occasional reflective marker on the guardrail. The night felt heavy and damp, the kind where the air stuck to your skin. It had rained earlier in the evening, and the boards of the bridge still looked dark and wet. I glanced down at the radio, expecting it to switch back like it usually did. It stayed on that hum, is almost like someone was holding a note somewhere very far away. "What are you doing?" I muttered, leaning forward and twisting the dial. The hum didn't change. AM, FM, auxiliary, all the same low vibration. Then, I looked over the passenger window. Below the bridge, the creek was barely visible, just a flat stretch of black water with faint ripples catching the headlights. That's when I noticed the glow. It wasn't bright, just a soft pale shape sliding under the surface, like someone had drawn a streak of light and erased it mid-motion. It moved slow and smooth, not splashing or churning, just drifting along beneath the water in a way that didn't look right. I eased my foot off the gas without really thinking, watching it pass under my side of the bridge. The hum on the radio didn't change, but I could feel it now, not just hear it, a faint vibration in my fingertips on the steering wheel. The shape glowed a little brighter for maybe 2 seconds. Long, faded at the edges. I couldn't tell what it was, only that it moved with a purpose that felt wrong for the creek. Then it dimmed and slipped into darkness. The moment it vanished, the hum cut out and the radio popped back to the country song, right where it had left off. No static, no warning, just normal sound again. I didn't touch anything. I drove the rest of the bridge in silence, at music still playing but feeling wrong now, like background noise in a place that shouldn't have any. When I finally reached the other side, I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder and turned the engine off. The night felt too quiet. Even the crickets seemed distant. I sat there staring back at the bridge, half expecting the glow to show again, but the water looked plain and dark. My phone buzzed. A message from my cousin Lacey asking if I'd made it home yet. I told her I was fine, just driving slow. I didn't mention the bridge. I didn't really know how to explain it without sounding off. After a few minutes, I started the car again and headed home, trying to shake the feeling that something had passed too close to me without touching. The next morning, I woke up thinking maybe I'd imagined it. Late night, tired eyes, wet roads, that was the easiest answer. Still, memory of that hum and the quiet glow wouldn't leave me alone. So around noon, I drove back out to the bridge. In daylight, it looked normal. Rusted metal supports, tired wooden planks, brown water drifting lazily underneath. I stood at the rail for a while, scanning the surface. No light, no motion beyond the slow current. I leaned slightly over, peering down, and caught a faint shimmer far below, like a reflection that didn't match the sun. It moved for a split second and then vanished again, as if it had only been there when I wasn't trying to see it. I stepped back, heart tapping a little faster than it should have. Later that night, it happened again. I found myself on the bridge around the same time, even though I didn't remember choosing that road. The sky was darker this time, clouds hiding every star. The air felt cooler, heavier. My tires rolled over the same wet boards I remembered from the night before. The radio stayed silent for most of the drive, but as soon as I reached the center of the bridge, the hum returned. Clearer this time. Deeper. It filled the inside of the car so completely it felt like a layer pressing down. I didn't touch anything. I just stared straight ahead, pulse ticking behind my ears. This time, the glow appeared on the opposite side, closer to the surface. A wider shape now, fainter around the edges, but undeniably there. It glided slow as if it were tracing the length of the bridge itself. I watched it move alongside me, matching my speed as I crept forward without realizing I'd slowed again. The sense of being watched crept in slowly, like a cold line down my back. Not from above, not from the road, from the water. The glow pulsed once, soft and steady, then dipped lower and disappeared again, leaving the surface untouched. No ripples, no sound. The radio went quiet immediately after. I exhaled and kept driving until I reached the other side, as hands tight on the wheel. I made it home and sat in my driveway for a long time, just listening to the normal night sounds. Frogs, wind through the trees, a distant dog barking. Everything felt normal again, but my skin still buzzed faintly like the hum left behind a memory of itself. I slept lightly, waking a few times to check if I could hear anything outside. Only silence. Over the next few days, I avoided that bridge without intentionally deciding to. I took longer routes, drove out of my way just to not pass over it. Every time my radio crackled a little or the road went quiet, my stomach tightened. A week later, I had no choice but to cross it again. A detour forced me that way after a delivery run, and the sky had turned overcast early, pressing low and gray. The air smelled like rain. As I approached the bridge, the radio didn't hum. No static, just ordinary talk show voices. I almost felt ridiculous for feeling anxious. Halfway across, the voices twisted suddenly into faint white noise. Then that same steady tone seeped through low and slow. I didn't look down right away. When I finally did, the water was calm, dark, empty. No glow this time. No shape, just shadow. But the hum stayed, strong and even, filling the car until I reached the far end. Then it vanished as soon as my tires rolled onto dry pavement. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a faint glimmer under the bridge, barely visible, like a distant reflection fading into nothing. I kept driving. I didn't stop. And when I reached home, I locked the door and stood in the quiet for a while, listening to the normal sounds of my house. The creek stayed quiet after that, but every time my radio dropped into static for even a second, I felt that low hum echo in my chest, like the water hadn't quite let go of me yet. The clouds first started looking wrong when I stepped out back for a smoke around 1:30 in the morning. It was one of those nights where the air felt too still, like everything had paused. I lived in a small rental outside of Ashford Falls, the kind of town that shut down completely after 10. My backyard wasn't much, just patchy grass, a half-broken fence, and a view of dark woods that went on forever. A single porch light buzzed above the door, throwing a dull yellow circle onto the ground. I leaned against the railing and lit up, trying to settle my nerves after a long shift at the hospital laundry room. My shoulders ached, and my hands still smelled faintly of detergent, no matter how much soap I used. That was when I noticed the clouds. They were thick, low, and gray, like they'd been sitting there all night. Except in the center of them, directly above the tree line, there was a perfectly smooth oval forming as if something invisible was pressing up from behind. At first I thought my eyes were just tired. I squinted, rubbed them with my free hand, and looked again. The shape remained. It wasn't ragged like normal clouds tearing apart. The edges were rounded and even, like someone had cut a hole out of the sky. A slow, pale glow appeared inside the opening. Not bright, just soft, almost milky white, like light bleeding through heavy fabric. The air shifted slightly. Not a breeze, more like pressure changing. I lowered the cigarette a little without realizing it. The glow stayed for maybe 3 seconds, long enough for my stomach to tighten and for the hairs on my arms to lift. Then the clouds closed back over the opening, smooth as if it had never been there. The light vanished completely. I stood frozen, lips half parted, listening for something. A plane, a helicopter, any sound at all. Nothing came. Just the distant croak of frogs down by the creek and the faint hum of power lines. I checked the sky again. Normal clouds, uneven, messy, drifting slowly. Wow, I muttered quietly. I finished the cigarette too fast and flicked the butt into the dirt. I told myself it was maybe heat rising or some weird reflection off the town water tower lights, but the way the opening formed didn't sit right with me. I went back inside, locked the door, and tried to shake it off. Watched a few episodes of some mindless cooking show. The feeling never left though, like I'd stepped outside and briefly caught a glimpse of something I wasn't meant to. Around 2:15, my cat Margot started acting strange. She sat in the hallway, ears flat, staring toward the back door. Low, steady growl rumbling from her throat. She never did that, not even during thunderstorms. I walked over and crouched beside her. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She didn't look at me, just stared at the door. A few seconds later, the faintest vibration passed through the floor. So light, I almost imagined it. The hanging picture frame near the kitchen shifted with a tiny tap against the wall. I swallowed hard. I told myself not to go back out, but curiosity kept building until it felt heavier than the fear. I grabbed my hoodie and stepped outside again. The yard looked the same. Quiet. Dark. Still. Then I looked up. High above the tree line, the clouds had opened again. Much wider this time. A smooth circular gap, almost too perfect, like a giant lens pointed straight down. Inside that opening, the glow had returned. Slightly brighter this time, still soft but more defined. It didn't cast shadows. The ground beneath wasn't lit up. It just hovered there, contained in the sky. The air smelled faintly metallic, sharp and cold. I stepped forward without meaning to. Each footfall felt slower, heavier, shot like the ground resisted me. A low sound began to pulse through the air, more felt than heard. Not quite a hum, not quite vibration, something steady and deliberate. I held my breath. Behind the glow, there was a darker silhouette moving smoothly, just barely visible through the brightness. It didn't spin or flicker. It glided, slow and controlled, as if tracing the edge of the opening. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then, just as suddenly, the glow dulled. The sound faded. The silhouette vanished. The clouds sealed shut again, leaving only an uneven gray mass drifting across the night sky. The silence afterward felt wrong. Too complete. I didn't remember walking back inside, but I found myself locking the door with shaky hands, pulse still racing. I stood there for a long minute, one hand pressed against my chest. Margot crept behind me, tail low, still staring toward the back door. I didn't sleep much after that. Every small sound made me flinch. Every time the wind brushed the siding, I thought the clouds might open again. By morning, the sky looked completely normal. Wispy, pale blue, sun already rising over the trees, no sign of anything strange. But when I stepped outside to check the yard, there was a patch of grass directly beneath where the opening had been, yellowed, flattened in a perfect circle, cool to the touch despite the morning heat. And above it, the clouds moved on like nothing had ever parted at all. I was walking my dog Jasper around 9:30 at night, which was later than usual, but I'd gotten stuck on a work call and he'd spent the last half hour staring at me like I was personally ruining his life. The air in our neighborhood in Fort Collins had that early autumn chill. Not cold, just enough to make your breath faint in the air. Most of the houses were dark except for a few porch lights, and the street was quiet enough that you could hear the distant hum of the highway a couple miles out. Jasper was sniffing along the curb, taking forever to choose a spot, and I was scrolling on my phone with the leash looped around my wrist. That's when something passed over us. Or at least, the shadow did. It covered the street and the sidewalk and part of the yard across from me, wide and smooth. like someone holding a giant sheet of tinted glass over the neighborhood. It didn't swoop or flutter. It glided, slow and steady, like it wasn't part of the air at all. The weirdest part was that there was no sound, no wind shift, nothing. My first instinct was that a big aircraft flew low, maybe a medevac helicopter, but there was no noise, none. Jasper froze mid-sniff, head snapping up like someone flicked a switch inside him. I looked up, perfectly clear sky, stars bright, no clouds, no plane lights, nothing that could have cast any shadow at all. I kept staring, waiting for my eyes to adjust, for some delayed movement to show up, but the sky didn't change. It just sat there, blank and quiet. Jasper whimpered once, a soft, low sound he doesn't usually make unless something genuinely scares him. His tail lowered, and his ears pulled back. He wasn't looking up. He was staring straight ahead at the house across the street. I followed his gaze. The shadow had swept over that house's front yard, but now everything looked normal again. The grass, the walkway, the 2 lawn chairs the couple kept out by the maple tree, nothing seemed disturbed, but something felt off, like the whole scene had been rearranged slightly and then put back. I pulled Jasper closer and started walking again, even though my legs felt stiff. The leash was trembling, and for a second I thought he was trembling, but then I realized it was my hand shaking. A block later, I heard a faint clicking sound behind us. Not footsteps, not an animal running. It was too rhythmic, too evenly spaced, like a slow metronome tapping on wood. Tap, tap, tap. I turned around fast, expecting to see someone walking. The street was empty. The porches were dark, no cars going by. The tapping stopped instantly, like whatever had made it froze the second I looked. Jasper pressed into my leg, which he never does on walks. I forced myself to keep going. The tapping didn't return, but halfway up the next block, a motion light flicked on in someone's yard, then another across the street, then another. 3 in a row, lighting up almost simultaneously, even though nothing was moving around them. I checked the wind. There wasn't any. We passed under a big ash tree that arched over the sidewalk. I always liked that tree. It felt like a landmark that meant home was close. But as we walked under it, I felt something shift above us. Not the branches, something behind them. A dimness, like the air thickened for half a second. I didn't look up this time. I just felt it pass, the same gliding sense from before, but lighter now, more distant, like it was drifting higher. By the time we reached my block, my mouth was dry. My house was only 5 doors down, but it felt far. The street looked too long, like the perspective had stretched out just slightly. Every house looked a little darker than it should have. My neighbor, old Mr. Denning, usually had his living room lamp on this late. Tonight his windows were completely black. Halfway down the block, my phone vibrated in my hand. I glanced at the screen. No notification, no call, no text, just the home screen. Then it vibrated again, longer this time, almost like someone was holding their finger on the back of it. Jasper whined again and pulled forward, tugging the leash harder than he usually does. His fur was standing up along his back. The streetlight above us flickered once. Not a normal flicker. It dimmed like something moved between us and the bulb. A shape, a big one, smooth around the edges. I finally looked up again, even though every part of me didn't want to. There was nothing there. But the light was still dimmed, holding steady at a lower brightness, like something was blocking a quarter of it. Except there was nothing visible. No outline. No darkness. Just a sense of something occupying space it shouldn't have been able to occupy without being seen. I stared at that empty spot until my eyes hurt, trying to force the darkness into a shape, but it stayed stubbornly sky-colored. When the streetlight suddenly popped back to full brightness, the whole sidewalk lit up so fast I flinched. Jasper jumped, twisting around like he expected something to land behind him. Nothing did. The air was still. We practically jogged the last stretch home. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, my phone buzzed again. I checked it. Still no missed calls, no notifications. But the time caught my eye. 9:48 p.m. I felt a chill crawl up my neck. The walk usually took 10 minutes, maybe 12, not almost 20. And we had only gone 2 blocks before I noticed everything starting to happen. I replayed it in my head. Every pause, every moment I stopped to look around. Didn't add up to that much time. Inside, Jasper went straight under the dining table and didn't come out even when I shook the treat bag. He kept staring toward the front door, ears pricked, body stiff. I sat on the couch to calm down, but then I noticed something else. The living room felt too cold. Not like AC cold, more like the air temperature had dropped outside and somehow seeped through the walls even though the windows were closed. I checked the thermostat. It read 72, same as always. But the air didn't feel 72. I walked to the front window. The blinds were already closed, but I lifted a slat to peek outside. The street looked completely still. All the motion lights were off again. The houses looked normal. The sky was clear, same stars, same quiet night. But I had the strangest feeling. Not that something was out there watching me, but that something had been out there and was now somewhere else. Not gone, just not visible anymore. Not on this street, maybe not even close. And for some reason, that made me more nervous than if I'd actually seen something staring back. I sat on the couch with my hands clasped tight, listening to the house, waiting for Jasper to stop hiding. He didn't come out for almost an hour. And when he finally did, he sniffed around the front door like someone had been standing there the whole time. Sometimes I replay the moment that shadow passed over us. The first one, the one that covered the street. It wasn't the kind of shadow a bird or drone could make. It was too smooth, too steady, too big, and the sky had been clear, completely clear. I didn't see anything else in the sky that night. Even now, saying it out loud, it sounds ridiculous. A shadow with nothing to cast it. But I know what I saw, or at least what I felt. Something was above us. And even if I never see it again, I don't think Jasper ever forgot what it felt like either. I woke up because my room felt colder than it should have. Not winter cold, I live in Coeur d'Alene, so I know actual cold, but the kind where the air feels wrong, too sharp for the temperature outside. I pulled the blankets tighter around me and noticed the faintest shimmer across the window, like someone had run a light across it. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and stared. A thin layer of frost covered the inside of the glass. Inside. I could see the condensation on the outside too, but the frost was definitely on my side. It covered almost the entire window, except for a small, perfectly round, clear spot in the center. Not smudged, not melted, just a circle the size of a coin, crisp-edged and untouched. I hadn't been breathing anywhere near the window. I sleep on the opposite side of the room. The heat had been running earlier that night, so it made no sense. I swung my legs out of bed, and the wood floor felt colder than usual, like the chill had sunk into it. I walked over to the window, standing a little to the side because I had this weird feeling that if I stood directly in front of that clear spot, something would be on the other side looking back. The frost was so thin I could see the street lamp outside bleeding a warm blur through it. I reached out and touched the glass lightly. My fingertip came away damp and cold. Normal frost. But when I leaned in toward the clear spot, the glass didn't fog from my breath. It stayed perfectly clear. That's what made my stomach knot up. I backed away and grabbed my phone to check the time. 3:47 a.m. I hadn't heard anything, no knocks, no weird noises, nothing that should have woken me. I live alone in a small rental house at the end of a cul-de-sac tucked between two bigger properties. Quiet place. Nothing much happens there. I checked the thermostat next. It said 67 degrees, same as always at night. No drop, no malfunction. I even put my hand over the vent. The air flowing out was warm. The window was the only cold thing in the room. I went around the house, turning on lights, half embarrassed even though no one was there to see me, freaking out. Living room, kitchen, hallway, all normal. No drafts, no open doors or windows. When I walked back into the bedroom, the frost hadn't changed. Same thin layer, same perfect circle. I considered wiping the window clean, but stopped myself. I don't know why, curiosity maybe, or fear that erasing it would somehow make things worse. I peeked outside instead. The street was dead still. No cars, no wind. The branches on the pine tree across the road weren't moving at all. The neighbor's yard light was on, lighting up the gravel path beside their shed, but there was no sign of anyone. I went back to bed eventually, though sleep wasn't the right word. I lay there watching the window until the frost started to melt with the sunrise. But that perfect circle stayed there longer than the rest, almost like it resisted the warmth. It finally faded sometime around 7. I figured that would be the end of it, but the next night something else happened. I had the curtains closed that time. I didn't want to see the glass. But around 2 a.m., I heard a soft crackle from the direction of the window, like the sound ice makes when it shifts or breaks apart. Not loud, just enough to cut through the quiet of the house. I froze and listened. It came again, a tiny crisp sound. I got up slowly, feeling that same unnatural chill in the air. I reached out and parted the curtain with 2 fingers. The window was clear, no frost, but the glass looked off. Not cracked, not fogged, just distorted, like the surface was bending light in a way it shouldn't. Then it stopped. The distortion smoothed out like it had never been there. Nothing else happened that night. I started checking the window before bed after that. For 3 days, everything seemed normal. The weather warmed up during the afternoons, so frost shouldn't have formed anyway. I convinced myself it had just been one of those weird temperature flukes houses get sometimes. Then the 4th night came. I fell asleep on the couch watching a late movie. I only woke up when the TV made a soft clicking noise like it was trying to turn itself off, but couldn't. The screen was still lit. The room was warm from the fireplace. Nothing strange, until I stood up. I heard something in the bedroom. Not loud, more like a faint, rhythmic tapping. Not steady tapping like a person. It was too soft and too irregular for that. Almost like static. I thought maybe something had fallen or an animal was brushing against the outside wall. I walked down the hall and pushed my bedroom door open carefully. The frost was back. A thin, perfect sheet across the whole interior window again, just like the first night. The same round, clear spot in the center. But this time, the frost wasn't still. It was forming, actively forming. I could see tiny crystals spreading outward from the edges, like they were growing toward the middle. I stepped into the room and my breath turned visible, even though the air wasn't cold enough for that. The little cloud of condensation hung there for a second before fading. I walked closer to the window, not sure why. I think I needed to know if the clear spot had returned exactly as before. It had. Perfect circle. No smudges. I raised my hand toward the glass, stopping just an inch away. The cold radiating off the window felt unnatural, too sharp, too focused, like the frost had a temperature separate from the room. Then something happened that made every hair on my arms rise. The clear spot pulsed, just once. A tiny dimming and brightening of the streetlight behind it, as if the glass itself flickered. The frost didn't move, the light didn't move, only the clear circle changed. I jerked my hand back and stumbled a step. The tapping sound returned, muffled against the window pane. I realized then that it was coming from inside the double-pane glass, not the inside surface, inside the sealed space between the 2 panes. There's no way for anything to get in there. I turned and left the room fast, leaving the door open behind me. I stood in the hallway with my hand on the wall until I felt steady enough to go back in. When I did, the frost had stopped spreading. The clear spot was still there, unchanged. Right then, I wiped my hand across the glass. The frost smeared under my palm. It melted instantly from the heat of my skin. But that clear circle didn't smear. It didn't fog. It didn't react at all. By sunrise, the frost was gone again. The circle wasn't. It lingered faintly for hours, almost like an afterimage burned into the glass. I moved a week later. I didn't tell the landlord anything except that I'd accepted a job in Spokane. It wasn't true, but I needed a reason. I didn't want to sleep in that room again. I didn't want to see frost forming in a place it shouldn't or hear sounds from a sealed window. I still think about it though. Not the frost, not the tapping, the pulse, that tiny dimming, like whatever made that perfect circle was responding to me standing there. Sometimes I check the windows in my new place in the middle of the night. Not for frost, just for that circle. So far, nothing. But every now and then the air feels colder than the thermostat says it should, and I catch myself staring at the glass, waiting for something to appear. I was cleaning up after dinner when I first noticed something was off with Daisy. She's a 6-year-old mutt, usually pretty chill, the type who will wander anywhere in the house just to nap in a new spot. But that night, she froze in the doorway of the living room like someone had hit a pause button. Her nails scraped lightly on the hardwood as she shifted her stance, but she wouldn't take a single step inside. Her eyes were locked upward, toward the middle of the ceiling. Not the corners where spiders sometimes hang out. Not the ceiling fan, dead center. I thought maybe she'd spotted a moth or something. I walked past her into the room, expecting she'd follow, but instead she let out this low, shaky growl I'd never heard from her before. Not defensive, more like she was warning me. I looked up, but I didn't see anything. The living room lights were on, just the normal warm bulbs. Nothing flickering, nothing weird. The ceiling looked exactly like it always did. White paint, a few faint roller marks from when I redid it last year, nothing else. "Daisy, come on," I said, patting my leg. She didn't move. Her ears were pinned back and her tail was stiff and low. I tried coaxing her again, but she started backing up slowly, step by step, like she was trying to keep an eye on the ceiling while also putting distance between herself and the room. I grabbed my phone, opened the flashlight, and shined it across the ceiling. Still nothing. No insect, no shadow, no crack. I even moved the coffee table so I could stand directly underneath and look straight up. Nothing unusual. Eventually I gave up and went back to the kitchen. Daisy stayed planted in the hallway, still staring, but not growling anymore. Just tense. I figured I'd check it again later. Dogs get weird about things sometimes. But about 20 minutes after that, while I was rinsing dishes, I heard this strange clicking sound from the living room. Not loud, more like a soft tapping. Irregular, almost like someone gently flicking a fingernail against glass. Except there's no glass on the ceiling. I dried my hands and walked back toward the room. Daisy was still there, still watching. When she saw me approach, she whined once, this unsteady little sound she only makes when she wants me to stop doing something. I stepped inside anyway. The clicking stopped instantly. I waited. Nothing. I walked in further, checking around. Vents, lamp cords, the TV wall mount. No idea what could have made that sound. I even stood with my ear tilted up, trying to hear anything at all. All I got was the faint hum of the fridge in the next room. I sighed and turned around to head back. That's when Daisy let out a sharp bark, one single warning bark, and my heart jumped. I spun around and looked up. There, across the ceiling, about 2 feet wide and right where she'd been staring all night, a faint shimmer passed. Not bright, not like a reflection from a phone or a car outside. More like a ripple of slightly darker air, like the ceiling had briefly turned into the surface of a pond touched by a breeze. It pulsed once, a soft, wave-like distortion, then vanished. Gone so fast, I wasn't even sure I'd seen it. The ceiling was just white again. I walked underneath it, slow, like I'd scare it somehow. I put my hand up to the spot, just smooth paint. No change in temperature, nothing weird. Daisy wouldn't even look away. She was still fixed on the ceiling like she was tracking something I couldn't see. I tried turning off the lights and then switching them back on. No change. I stood on a chair and ran my hand across the drywall, tapping, pressing, completely normal. I told myself maybe headlights from a car at the intersection a block over had bounced weirdly through the window, except the blinds were already half closed and it hadn't looked like light, more like displacement, like the air itself had moved. About an hour later, I was lying on the couch with the TV on low when I heard the clicking again. Same soft, irregular tapping. I muted the TV, it kept going for a few seconds, then stopped. Daisy was lying against my leg by then. She finally came into the room once I sat down, but she still kept glancing upward every now and then, ears tilting with each little noise. At one point, she sat up abruptly and stared at the exact same spot as before. She didn't growl this time, just watched with this tight, serious focus she usually saves for squirrels or strangers at the door. I turned the TV off completely and listened. The house felt too quiet. Not just regular nighttime quiet, but the kind where you notice what's missing. I couldn't hear the fridge hum anymore, or the heater, or the faint electrical buzz from the lamp. Everything felt muffled, like someone had stuffed insulation into the walls. I stood up slowly. Daisy stood too. I looked at the ceiling again, also slowly, almost afraid I'd see something. For a moment, maybe half a second, I caught just the slightest ripple, barely visible, like heat rising off asphalt, except horizontal. I blinked, and it was gone. I backed up until my legs hit the couch. I sat down. Daisy immediately pressed against me, the way she does during thunderstorms. The weird silence lifted all at once. The fridge clicked back on. The heater made its usual thump. Everything normalized like someone had flipped a switch. It didn't occur to me until later how strange the timing was. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I started drifting off, Daisy would sit up and stare at the ceiling again, sometimes for minutes at a time. Eventually, she curled up against my chest, which she never does except when she's scared. I kept one hand on her and stared up too, even though there was nothing to see except the usual faint shadows from the street lamp outside. Around 3 a.m., I heard a soft whirring sound. Not mechanical, more like distant wind chimes, but without the metallic tones. Just soft, steady movement. I checked the window. There was no breeze. The trees weren't moving. Everything outside was still. The sound wasn't outside anyway. It seemed to be coming from above the ceiling, somewhere in the space between the drywall and the attic. I went up to the attic with a flashlight, stepping carefully on the boards so I wouldn't fall through. It was freezing up there, breath turning to little clouds. I checked around for animals, for drafts, for anything. The insulation was undisturbed. No droppings, no movement, no sign of mice or raccoons. But in the exact spot above the living room ceiling, the air felt just a touch warmer. Not warm enough to be a heater duct. I checked for those, just not as cold as the rest of the attic. I stayed there longer than I should have, shining my flashlight around, waiting for any movement or sound. Nothing happened. Eventually, the air cooled to match the rest of the attic, and when I pressed my hand to the insulation, it felt normal. When I went back downstairs, Daisy was waiting at the bottom step, tail low, ears perked. She sniffed me like I'd been somewhere unfamiliar. I slept on the couch with the lights on and the TV playing quietly just to keep the room feeling normal. In the morning, the ceiling looked completely ordinary. Daisy walked through the living room like nothing had happened. She even wagged her tail and grabbed her toy, like the whole night had reset for her. But later, when I stood under that spot and looked up, I swear I could see the faintest difference in the paint texture, a slightly smoother circular area, maybe 2 feet across. If I hadn't known exactly where to look, I wouldn't have noticed anything at all. I haven't seen the shimmer again. Not the same way. But every now and then, usually at night when the house settles and the lights are low, Daisy will stop whatever she's doing and stare up at the ceiling like she's listening to something moving that only she can hear. I was taking my trash cans to the curb when I first saw them. 2 kids standing on the front porch of the house next door, knocking on the door in this weird, steady rhythm. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. It was almost too even, like they'd practiced it. It was close to 9:45 p.m., early September, warm enough that I was in shorts and a t-shirt. Our subdivision outside Fort Wayne is usually quiet at that hour. Porch lights, sprinkler timers, the occasional dog barking. Nothing strange. But the moment I saw those kids, something in me locked up. My neighbor, the Fergusons, were out of town visiting their daughter. Their driveway was empty. Their porch light was off. No reason for anyone to be knocking. I stopped near the edge of my driveway, one hand on the trash can handle, listening. The kids didn't notice me at first. Or maybe they did and just didn't care. They were both facing the door, standing close enough that their shoulders almost touched. A boy and a girl, maybe 11 or 12. Their clothes were plain, dark pants, long-sleeved shirts, too much fabric for the warm night. Their hair hung straight and flat, and neither of them seemed to be sweating. I cleared my throat. "You two okay?" They froze. Not startled, not surprised, just stopped. The boy's hand hovered midair from his last knock. Then, in perfect unison, both heads turned toward me. Something about that motion sent a cold feeling through my chest. It was too synchronized, like mirrors moving. The girl spoke first. "Do you have a place to hide from the bright ones?" Her voice was soft, almost polite, but the question made zero sense. "The what?" I asked. They didn't step off the porch. They didn't come closer. They just stared. And that's when I noticed their eyes. At first I thought the porch shadows were playing tricks on me. The Fergusons' porch light was off, and only the faint light from the street lamp reached them. But the kids' eyes weren't catching any reflections. They were just solid black, depthless. Like someone had filled their eyes in with ink. My mouth went dry. "Look, I think you might be lost. Nobody's home there." The boy blinked once, a slow, oddly heavy blink, and asked, "Do you have somewhere safe?" Something shifted in the air then. A pressure, almost. The hairs on my arms lifted, and the space around us felt charged, the way it does before a storm, except the sky was clear. I pulled my phone from my pocket without thinking. I don't know what I expected. Maybe to call someone, or at least use the flashlight. The screen was already on, but it jittered violently. The icons stretched, glitched, flickered. My wallpaper split into jagged shapes. The time at the top kept changing. 9:45, 9:46, 3:12, 12:08, back to 9:45. I stared at it, my stomach twisting. What the hell? The kids didn't react. They just stood there, watching me, those black eyes reflecting nothing. A low hum started in the air. Not loud, barely above a whisper, but deep enough that I felt it more than heard it, like a faint electrical vibration threading through the neighborhood. My porch light flickered once. The street lamp hummed louder. "Do you hear that?" I asked, even though I didn't expect them to answer. The kids nodded. Perfectly in sync. The girl said, "They're close." The boy added, "Too close." I looked up and down the street, expecting maybe a car to pull around the corner, some explanation for the strange humming. But the road was empty. All the houses were dark and quiet. My phone buzzed violently in my hand and then went black, refusing to turn back on. I took a step back toward my own porch, heart pounding. "Okay, I don't know what's going on, but you need to tell me where you live." Instead of, "I'll walk you home," or... The hum grew sharper. Not louder, just more focused, almost like it was coming from the air directly above us. I looked up instinctively. The sky was empty, clear, silent. No planes, no drones, no lights, nothing that could have made that sound. When I looked back down, the kids were gone. Not running down the driveway, not cutting through the yard, not stepping off the porch. Gone. The Fergusons' porch was empty, completely empty, no sign of movement. No sound from the bushes, nothing. I froze, staring at the spot where they'd stood. My pulse hammered in my neck. The hum faded slowly, draining out of the air until the night felt normal again, too normal. I backed up toward my own house, scanning the street, the shadows, the yards. Everything was still. Even the cicadas seemed to be waiting for something. Then I noticed something on the porch. Smears. Small, faint marks on the wood, like someone with wet soles had stood there. Not footprints exactly, just darkened impressions where pressure had been applied. They formed two small, perfect ovals, side by side. I stepped closer, crouching down to look. The wood was cool to the touch, but the faint marks were warm, as if someone had just been standing there moments earlier. The trash cans sat forgotten in the street. My phone restarted on its own, the screen returning to normal like nothing had happened. I didn't call anyone, didn't know what to say. I went inside and locked every door. About half an hour later, I checked the porch again from my downstairs window. The marks on the wood had faded, drying in the warm night air. The street was still empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the kids hadn't left the neighborhood. Every so often, a faint hum drifted over the rooftops, too soft to pinpoint, too short to record. I sat on the couch until dawn, listening to it come and go, never loud enough to explain, never long enough to ignore. The Fergusons came home 2 days later. I didn't tell them what happened. I only asked if their security camera had caught anything on the 10th. It hadn't. But the camera log showed something else. At 9:45 p.m., the feed froze for 12 full seconds. A perfect static frame of the empty porch. When it came back, the timestamp jumped to 9:47. A full 2 minutes lost, and the porch was still empty. The overhead lights above the pumps flickered in a clean, repeating pattern. 3 quick pulses in perfect rhythm, then a short pause, then 3 more. It wasn't random or broken bulb kind of flicker. It felt deliberate, like someone was tapping a code through the wiring. I slowed my car as I pulled into the lot, watching the glow wash over the cracked concrete. It was close to 1:30 a.m., the kind of hour where everything felt thin and quiet. The night was cool for early spring, damp air hanging low and still, and the highway had been empty for miles. The station sat just off Route 22 outside a small stretch of farmland, a lonely little place with 1 snack aisle and 2 aging pumps that buzzed even when nobody used them. I got out and stood for a second with my keys still in my hand, listening. No wind, no cars, just the faint hum of electricity overhead. The lights pulsed again, same pattern. When I looked through the window, the cashier was already looking up. He frowned, then said under his breath, "It's back," before the lights steadied and went normal again. I pushed open the door and the stale smell of coffee and cleaner hit me. The bell chimed, sharp against the quiet. He didn't even look at me right away. He just kept staring at the ceiling like he expected it to move. "Everything okay?" I asked. He blinked and looked at me like he just remembered where he was. "Yeah, just weird wiring. Happens sometimes." It didn't sound convincing. He had a name tag that read Nelson, though he looked a bit younger than that name suggested. Maybe late 20s, tired eyes, faded hoodie. I grabbed a bottle of water and set it on the counter while he rang it up. Outside, the overhead lights flickered again, not as bright, but still synchronized, still steady. Nelson's jaw tightened. He kept his hand on the counter like he needed the balance. "How often does that happen?" I asked. "Only when it's around," he said without realizing he'd said more than he meant to. I paused. "What's around?" He gave a half shrug. "Nothing. Probably nothing. Just some issue with the line from the street. Transformer or something." I paid and stepped outside. As I unscrewed the water bottle, I noticed the quiet felt heavier than before. No insects, no distant traffic, just the soft hum above. The lights popped once more. 3 pulses. Pause. 3 pulses. I looked around the lot. Nothing moved. Beyond the pumps, the field stretched dark and flat, broken only by a few leaning fence posts and the outline of bare trees. The sky above was low and cloudy, reflecting faint orange from the nearest town miles away. I started filling my tank. The pump clicked on with a hollow whir, and that's when I noticed my phone screen go dim and bright again, as if the brightness was adjusting, but there was no notification. The time read 1:41. A slow pressure settled behind my eyes. Not pain, more like the feeling you get when a storm is about to break. Behind the building, something shifted. I glanced toward the side alley, expecting maybe a stray animal or a late truck pulling in, but the space stayed dark. No headlights, just shadow. Then, barely, the air vibrated. It wasn't sound exactly, more like a faint tremor traveling through my jaw and chest. Low, steady, brief. The pump handle felt warm in my hand. Nelson stepped outside, leaning against the doorway, his gaze scanning the lot. He didn't acknowledge me at first, just stared past the pumps like he was tracking something invisible. "You see it too sometimes?" he said. "See what?" "That flicker, when it starts acting patterned." "I just noticed it tonight." He nodded slowly. "Happened a few times this week. Always late. Always the same rhythm." Another thrum rolled through the air, subtle enough someone could miss it if they weren't paying attention. I swallowed. "What did you mean earlier when you said it's back?" Nelson let out a slow breath. "A couple nights ago, same thing happened. Lights going weird, whole building buzzing like crazy. Then every security camera glitched for about 10 seconds. Just snow. But when they came back..." He paused, rubbing his hands together. "There was something on the far edge of the lot. What kind of something? Couldn't really tell. Just a shape. Like distortion over the air. Not solid, not gas. Just wrong." The word hung between us. The lights overhead flickered again, slightly slower this time. 3 pulses. Pause. 3 pulses. My phone screen turned completely black, then lit back up again on its own, still showing the same time. Nelson straightened suddenly. "There. You feel that?" The vibration had grown slightly stronger, like a quiet engine idling somewhere close but unseen. The skin on my arms prickled as if charged. Beyond the pumps, near where the gravel met the field, the darkness didn't look normal anymore. It wasn't darker, it was smoother, almost like the space itself had flattened. Then a dull glow surfaced within it, not bright, not sharp, just pale and muted, almost milky, drifting without rhythm. Nelson stopped breathing. The glow hovered low, maybe 5 feet off the ground, moving sideways in a slow glide. No sound, no wind. The lights above us flickered in perfect sync with its motion. I felt the strangest urge to step forward and equally strong instinct not to. The glow shifted again, stretching slightly, then compressing back into a rounded shape, like it was adjusting itself to the space. Then every light over the pumps flickered at once. The vibrations spiked, and the glow dissolved, thinning out until it blended with the surrounding darkness like it had never been there. Everything went still. No flicker, no hum, no pressure. Just the normal quiet of a closed highway gas station. Nelson exhaled hard and placed both hands on his knees. "That's exactly like before," he muttered. I noticed my tank had stopped pumping even though it wasn't full. The screen on the pump displayed a frozen number. "Does it ever come closer?" I asked. He shook his head. Not so far. It just shows up, messes with the power, then leaves. I glanced at the field again, half expecting it to swell back into view. Nothing. The building lights returned to their usual steady glow. The buzzing faded into normal background noise. My phone settled, screen bright and responsive again. I forced a laugh that didn't feel like it belonged to me. Probably just some weird electrical fault. Moisture in the lines or something. Maybe, he said, not sounding convinced. I finished filling manually and returned the pump. As I climbed back into my car, I couldn't shake the sense that something had been aware of us standing there, like the space itself had paused to observe before continuing on. I checked the time again once inside. 1:41 a.m. It hadn't moved since before the lights first flickered. When I pulled back onto the road and glanced in my rearview mirror, the station stood quiet and normal, glowing softly against the empty night, as if nothing strange had ever passed through it at all. The night dropped into silence so fast it felt like someone flipped a switch. 1 second, there were crickets, wind in the grass, the faint rush of air through my open windows, and then there was nothing. No background noise at all. Just my tires humming on the pavement and my own breathing. I was driving a narrow back road outside of Pine Ridge, the stretch that ran between open fields and half-forgotten farmhouses. It was late, around 11:45, and the air had that heavy summer stickiness to it, the kind that made your skin feel slightly damp, even with the breeze from the car. I had the radio off and both windows down because the air felt better that way, or at least it had until everything went quiet. At first, I thought maybe my ears had popped or something. I clicked my tongue, shook my head, turned the radio on, and back off. The silence stayed unnaturally clean, like the world had been muted. That's when I noticed the clicking. It didn't come from the road or inside the car. It sounded higher, like it was coming from somewhere above the tree line. A soft, rhythmic tick, 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 spaced evenly apart. Not fast, not slow, just steady. I glanced up through the windshield, half expecting to see a helicopter or some drone hovering, but the sky was dark and cloudless. No blinking lights, no navigation beams. Just a spread of dim stars and the faint glow from distant town lights. The clicking continued. I eased my foot off the gas without really meaning to. The speedometer crept down as I rolled forward, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. It didn't echo. It didn't change volume. It just stayed perfectly consistent, like it wasn't affected by distance at all. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel. The hair on my arm stood up, even though the night was warm. Okay, I muttered to myself, more out of habit than comfort. The road curved slightly, and my headlights swept across a long stretch of weeds and a rusted cattle gate. Everything looked normal. Too normal. The clicking grew slightly louder, not in a dramatic way, just enough that I became more aware of it, like realizing someone was standing behind you without turning around. I slowed to almost a crawl. The silence around it felt dense, almost padded, like sound wasn't allowed to travel anymore. Then the clicking stopped. The sudden absence of it made my chest feel hollow. I held my breath without realizing it, listening hard for anything else. Still nothing. No insects returning, no wind, just that same unnatural quiet. And then the silence shattered. The crickets burst back to life all at once, so loud and chaotic it almost made me flinch. The breeze flooded into the car again. Leaves rustled. Night sounds returned like someone had opened a door, but something still felt wrong. The air pressure inside the car felt different, heavier somehow. My chest tightened as I glanced overhead again. That's when I saw it. Not directly. It was more like noticing a shape where a shape shouldn't exist. A faint, dark distortion gliding across the sky, barely visible, like heat shimmer, but smoother. It moved slowly, not matching the direction of any breeze. I watched it pass over a cluster of stars, softly warping them as it moved. Then the clicking started again. Tick, tick, tick. This time it felt closer. My heartbeat picked up, and I gripped the wheel harder, knuckles pale. My mind kept trying to label it as something normal. Electrical interference, random mechanical noise, brain glitch, but none of those explained the way the sound came from above, or how the sky itself seemed slightly wrong. The distortion shifted direction without any visible turning, gliding sideways like it wasn't obeying the usual rules of movement. My phone buzzed faintly in the cup holder. I glanced down. No notification. just the screen lighting up like it had woken itself. The time read 11:47. I could have sworn it had been nearly midnight a moment ago. The clicking softened again, then fell into silence. I looked back up. The sky looked normal. No distortion, no movement, just the usual blank darkness. But the road ahead wasn't right. My headlights illuminated the same fence line and tree grouping I had already passed at least 10 minutes earlier. The crooked mailbox, the leaning utility pole, the same cracked strip of asphalt with faded paint. I knew this stretch. I had grown up driving it. I turned around slightly in my seat, checking behind me. The road curved away into darkness exactly as it should. Confused, I checked my phone clock again, 11:47. It hadn't moved. A strange, heavy calm settled in my chest. Not relief, but the kind of quiet you feel before you understand something is wrong. I drove forward again, slow and careful, eyes scanning both sides of the road and the sky above. A faint shimmer drifted over the tree line once more, barely noticeable unless you focus directly on it. The clicking returned, lower this time, closer. I stopped the car completely. The engine idled softly. My breath felt loud in my ears. The distortion hovered, almost directly above the road now, as if it had positioned itself to watch. No sound, but the faint, steady ticking. My hands trembled slightly against the wheel. I whispered, "What are you?" Even though I didn't really expect an answer. There wasn't one. Instead, the clicking quickened for 3 beats, then stopped again. The silence slammed down like a curtain. A pressure washed over my ears, not painful, just heavy. Then everything snapped back. Cicadas buzzed, wind rolled through the grass. My car engine hummed normally. The shimmer vanished like it had never been there. I checked my phone again. 11:58. I blinked, staring at the screen, then out at the road, then back again. I hadn't moved more than a few feet since stopping. My gas gauge hadn't changed. My hands still gripped the wheel in the same position. Nothing around me looked disturbed. I pulled slowly back onto the road, heart still racing. The normal night sounds almost too loud now. Every few seconds I glanced upward, waiting for the clicking to return. It didn't. When I finally reached the edge of town and the first streetlights came into view, the air started to feel normal again, like the world had reset itself. But the sense that something had been there, calmly observing, never left my mind. Driving the rest of the way home, the only sound was the hum of my tires and the whisper of wind through the open windows, and the quiet awareness that the silence had belonged to something else entirely. The same star had been sitting in my windshield for so long that I finally realized it wasn't normal. I was driving home from a closing shift at the grocery store in Mays Ridge, cutting through the back roads that ran along the foothills. It was just after 4 a.m., that vague time before sunrise when everything felt drained and soft. A light mist hung over the pavement, and the air was cool enough that my breath fogged the glass when I exhaled too hard. I first noticed it about 10 minutes into the drive. One bright point of light, sharper than the others, sitting just above the dark outline of the mountains to my right. I assumed it was just a star, maybe Venus or something. I didn't know. I didn't care. I was tired and thinking about my bed. But as I kept driving, it stayed in the exact same spot, same angle, same height, same brightness. The road curved, trees thinned, a low valley opened up. The star didn't shift at all. It stayed locked in place like someone had pinned it to the sky. I glanced at the clock on my dash, 4:13 a.m. I looked back up again, still there. Another 5 minutes passed. The car heater rattled softly, pushing out slow bursts of warm air. My phone vibrated once on the console from a spam email I ignored. The star didn't move. That was when it started to bother me. I lowered the volume of the radio and rolled the window down an inch, letting cold, damp air creep inside. The smell of wet dirt and pine drifted in. Everything was quiet. No other cars, no animals crossing, just the hum of tires and that unmoving light. The logical part of my brain kicked in. Maybe it was a tower light or a distant plane flying toward me. But planes shifted slightly and tower lights blinked. This didn't blink, it just burned steady. I tested it by leaning left, then right, then slightly forward over the wheel. The light stayed perfectly centered in my view, as if it wasn't tied to the landscape at all. I swallowed and tried to laugh it off. "You're just tired, Caleb," I muttered to myself. Another stretch of road went by. A faded sign for Orchard Creek flashed through my headlights. I'd been watching this thing for at least 20 minutes now, and it hadn't drifted even an inch. Then something small happened that I couldn't explain. The light brightened slightly. Just a touch. Enough that the mist around it faintly shimmered. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. The air inside the car felt heavier, like the pressure had changed without warning. My ears popped faintly, the way they did in elevators or when storms rolled in fast. I slowed down, foot easing off the gas. The light stayed steady. Watching. Waiting. Then, without any gradual movement, it slid sideways. Not drifting. Not fading. It just shifted left, smooth and immediate, like someone dragging a cursor across a screen. It moved about 15 feet in the sky, at least how it looked from where I sat, and then cut off completely. No fade, no trail, just gone. The spot where it had been turned empty and black again. I stared through the windshield, foot hovering just above the brake, heart pounding harder than it should have for something so quiet. I half expected another light to appear or some delayed sound to follow. But there was nothing. Just the road and the faint hiss of my tires through damp gravel. My dash clock ticked to 4:37 a.m. I hadn't even noticed how much time had passed. A strange tightness crept into my chest, that uneasy feeling like I'd missed something important. Like my attention had been pulled away for a moment I couldn't remember. I checked my mirrors. Behind me, the road was empty and black. I forced myself to keep driving, even though every instinct told me to pull over and stare at the spot where the light had been. The farther I went, the more wrong the silence felt. No frogs, no birds. The usual night sounds had gone completely absent. A few miles later, my phone screen lit up again without any notification sound. I glanced down for a split second and saw my location dot on the map app slightly off the road, somewhere between trees where I definitely hadn't driven. It corrected itself a moment later. When I reached the edge of town, the normal world slid back in like nothing had happened. Streetlights glowed, a stray dog trotted across a driveway, the distant buzz of an early delivery truck echoed down the street, but my shoulders never relaxed. When I got home and turned off the engine, the sudden silence felt just as heavy as the one on the road. I sat there for a moment, staring through the windshield at my dark porch. I checked the time again, 5:02 a.m. I knew the drive shouldn't have taken that long. Even now, I couldn't say what that light was. I just knew it wasn't behaving like any star I'd ever seen. And I knew that for 20 quiet minutes, it had felt like something was looking directly back at me from very far away. I woke up because of the cold on my face. That was the first thing I registered, a thin, sharp draft coming straight across my pillow like someone cracked a door in the dead of winter. I reached out automatically to pull the blankets tighter, but my hand brushed empty air. My window was open. I didn't sit up right away. I just stared at the silhouette of the curtain moving, slow and steady, like it was breathing. I always locked that window before bed. I double-checked it every night, especially since I moved into the cabin. Old place, older locks, surrounded by nothing but pines and a narrow gravel road half a mile out. The kind of setting where you made sure things stayed closed. I finally pushed myself up on my elbows. The air felt colder than it should have for early autumn. My phone said 2:14 a.m., no notifications, no wind advisory, just the dim glow of the screen lighting the room. Outside, past the curtain, something glowed faintly. Not bright, not like a spotlight, just a soft, pale blue. It drifted between the trees behind the cabin, steady and slow, like someone walking with a lantern held low. But the light wasn't swinging or flickering. It stayed perfectly even. I watched it through the sliver of window, barely breathing. Whatever it was moving deeper into the woods, the opposite direction of the road. Each second it got a little dimmer, until it was the same shade as the moonlight. And then I couldn't tell if I was still seeing it, or imagining the afterglow in my eyes. I rubbed my face, trying to shake off sleep, but the cold air wouldn't let me pretend I dreamed any of this. I swung my legs out of bed, my feet hitting the creaky floorboards. The whole cabin was silent in that heavy way where every sound seems too loud, even your breathing. I walked to the window and pushed the curtain aside. The glass was fogged from the temperature difference, but the bottom pane was open a few inches. The lock was still in the closed position, which made my stomach twist. It was one of those old metal latches you had to physically slide and push down to secure. It couldn't just lift on its own. I checked the frame for cracks or anything that might have let it slip open. Nothing looked tampered with. The wood was old but solid. The lock was tight, but the window was open anyway. The woods behind my place, just a wall of pines swallowing the night. No glow now, just the faint suggestion of moonlight catching the branches. I shut the window fully and made sure the lock was engaged. Then I checked it again, and again. When I stepped back, the room felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Not dangerous, just off, like something had been in the air and hadn't fully cleared out. Down the hall, the refrigerator hummed once and then went silent. All of the appliances in this place were old, so weird noises weren't surprising, but the way it cut off felt abrupt, like power had blinked for a second even though the lights stayed steady. I walked to the kitchen and checked the stove clock. It was still on, 2:17 a.m., normal. But then I noticed that the microwave clock read 2:09, and the coffee maker read 2:32. None of them matched, not even close. I stood there for a moment, trying to remember if they'd been like that earlier. I didn't think so. I had made dinner around 7, and the stove time matched my phone then. I was pretty sure it did anyway. I walked to the sliding door that faced the lake, just to check it. Locked. Curtains undisturbed. No strange glow out there, just the faint outline of water reflecting the sky. I went back to the bedroom, grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand, and hovered near the window again. I told myself I wasn't going outside, I wasn't that stupid, but I kept the light in my hand like it meant something. For a long moment, I just listened. The woods were dead silent. No wind, no insects, no distant owl or coyote, nothing. Silence in the forest isn't rare, but this was different. It felt thick, like the sound had been taken away rather than just stopping naturally. I backed away from the window without turning my back on it. The room felt colder again, even though the window was shut. I went to the living room and turned on the small lamp next to the couch. The warm light helped, but only a little. The cabin wasn't big, just 2 rooms, a bathroom, and the small kitchen, but every corner suddenly seemed too dark. At 2:28 a.m., the refrigerator hummed on again. The noise startled me so hard I dropped the flashlight. When I picked it up, I noticed something else. The clock on the stove now said 2:28:2, and so did the microwave and the coffee maker. All 3 had synced to the same minute. I blinked at them, wondering if maybe I had remembered the times wrong before. Then the microwave's screen dimmed and brightened once, like someone had waved a hand in front of the sensor, even though it didn't have one. I moved away from the kitchen slowly. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat on the couch with the lamp on, the flashlight next to me, and my back against the wall so I could see both windows. Every so often I checked the woods through the front window. Nothing. No motion. No glow. But the silence lasted for hours. Around 6, right before sunrise, I cracked the bedroom window open again, just an inch, and leaned close, listening. This time, there were birds. Normal sounds. The woods waking up like they always did. I got dressed and stepped outside onto the back porch. The air was cold, but normal cold, like not that strange, heavy chill from earlier. The grass had dew on it like usual. No footprints, no marks on the deck. Nothing unusual at all, but the woods felt watched in a way I couldn't put into words, like something had just been there and stepped out of sight before I opened the door. I walked down the porch stairs and stopped a few feet from the tree line. The ground was soft, no strange prints, no scorch marks, no disturbed branches, nothing that would line up with any light moving through here in the middle of the night. I stayed there longer than I meant to, listening. The birds kept singing. A small breeze moved the tops of the pines. Everything seemed normal. But when I turned to go back inside, something flickered at the corner of my eye. I spun around fast, just trees. But the light between 2 trunks looked slightly lighter than the rest of the forest, like something had been there a moment before and left its shape in the air. I stood rooted for a few seconds, staring into that spot until it blended back in with everything else. Inside, the clocks were all still synced, all reading 6:07 a.m. I made coffee just to feel grounded, but even the smell felt strange, sharper than usual, like my senses were still in night mode. Before going to work, I checked the bedroom window one more time. Locked. Solid. Exactly how I had left it. Nothing looked tampered with. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had reached in, not physically, but close enough to affect the room. Close enough to see me. I never saw that soft blue glow again. Not like that first night. But sometimes when I take the trash out late, or I step onto the porch after sunset, the woods behind the cabin feel too still. Just for a second. Like something deeper in the trees has paused whatever it's doing to listen back. And I always go inside a little faster after that. I was driving home from my friend Aaron's place in Milton, a little farming town about 20 minutes from where I live in southwest Missouri. It was close to midnight, one of those late summer nights where the heat finally breaks and everything feels washed out and quiet. The gravel roads out there are barely marked, so you basically just follow memory and hope you don't miss a turn. I'd taken that route 100 times, but that night the air felt thicker somehow, like the humidity was sitting inside the truck with me instead of outside. I'd just passed the old red barn that used to belong to the Whitakers. No one lives on that property now. The barn's still standing, though leaning at one corner like it's tired of being there. I always notice it because it sits alone in a big open patch of field. Usually there's nothing back there except a few rusted out tractors and a line of cottonwoods. That's when I saw the glow. It wasn't bright, more like the color of a candle flame if you cupped your hands around it. A soft orange flicker hanging low behind the barn, just over the ground. I saw it for a full second before my brain caught up enough to question what I was looking at. My first thought was that someone was working late and had set up a lantern. People do odd things out here. It wasn't unheard of, but the light didn't bounce off anything. The side of the barn stayed dark. The field stayed dark. Even the grass right under it looked normal. The glow was just suspended there, as if it wasn't touching anything around it. I slowed the truck a little, rolling over the gravel. The sound of the tires felt too loud in that moment. I leaned forward and squinted past the windshield. The glow stayed put, steady and small. It should have dimmed or gotten distorted through the dust and distance, but it stayed the exact same shape. When I got closer, maybe 100 feet away, the light began to rise. Not quickly. Just a slow, smooth vertical lift, totally straight. No wobble, no flicker, no sound. It didn't brighten or spread. It just went up the way a balloon might if someone let go of the string, except it didn't drift sideways at all. I stopped the truck completely. I left the engine running, more because I didn't want to be stranded if something happened than because I planned to get out. The glow rose above the barn's roofline, then kept going until it was high enough that I had to sit up straighter to follow it. The minute it cleared the roof, it picked up speed. Not a burst, just a clean acceleration upward like it had shifted gears. Then it disappeared, not into a cloud, not far away, just gone. The space it had been in looked the same as the rest of the night sky the instant it vanished. I kept staring at the exact spot, waiting for an after image or something, but there was nothing left. I didn't move for a while. The engine idled, rattling faintly against the quiet. The only other sound was the chirping from the field. Crickets, maybe. They'd gone silent when the thing lifted, though I didn't notice at the time. They started again right after it vanished. It took me another minute before I eased the truck forward. I didn't know what else to do. I wasn't going to get out and go poking around. I just wanted to get home, but as I rolled past the barn, I felt this pressure in my chest, like the air had changed, heavier or thinner. I can't describe it right. My ears popped slightly, like I'd gone up a hill too fast. I told myself it was nerves. About a quarter mile past the barn, I realized the radio had cut out. It wasn't off, it was just dead silent. The display still showed the station, but no sound came through. I turned the volume dial up and back down. Nothing. I changed the channel. Nothing. I hit the power button and it clicked off, then clicked back on to the same dead silence. The weirdest part was the air. The smell of dust and old hay should have been coming through the vent, but instead I picked up something faintly metallic. Not strong, like blood. More like being near an old metal tank in summer heat. That warm, tinny scent. I rolled the window halfway down. The smell faded, but so did every other smell. No fields, no animals. just pure neutral air like the inside of a hotel room. When I reached the fork that led to County Road 19, I stopped again. I don't know why. Something about the engine hum felt off. Not broken, just like it was fighting a slight drag. I tapped the gas lightly, and the truck hesitated before responding, almost like it needed an extra second to remember what its job was. I sat there at the fork, staring at the tree line ahead. The night felt too wide, too empty. Then I saw another light. This one wasn't orange, it was white and far smaller, more like a reflection off metal. But it wasn't moving with the wind or anything. It held a fixed position between two distant tree trunks, maybe 8 feet off the ground. It reminded me of when deer catch headlights, except it wasn't shaped like an eye or moving like anything alive. I blinked, and it flickered. Not the way a flashlight flickers, it was more like it shifted now, revealing that its shape wasn't round. It had angles, a slight edge on one side, almost like I wasn't supposed to see it straight on but caught it from the wrong angle. I leaned closer to the windshield. The light dimmed just slightly, as if pulling away. I put the truck in gear and slowly eased forward down the main road, choosing not to take the fork. The light didn't follow. It didn't move at all. It just remained in that gap until the trees blocked my view. The metallic smell came back briefly, then faded again. 2 miles later, the radio crackled back to life so suddenly that I jerked the wheel. It wasn't music or a station. It was just static, low, steady, like an empty channel. I cycled through a few stations until one finally caught, some late-night talk show from Springfield, coming in warped and thin. At least it was something. When I finally turned onto my own road, every porch light on the street was on except mine. It hadn't even occurred to me that I'd left it on earlier in the evening. I pulled into the driveway and stared at the unlit bulb. I tried the switch when I got inside. Nothing. The bulb was fine the next morning. Light popped on first try. A few days later, I asked Aaron if anyone out near Milton had been working in their fields late at night. He said no. Everyone had been dealing with a busted irrigation line, and no one was out past 10. I didn't mention the glow. I just said I thought I'd seen headlights. That orange light has stayed in my mind, though, mostly because of how it rose. No wobble, no spill, no interaction with the world around it. It didn't light up the barn, didn't catch the grass, didn't reflect off my windshield, even when I was close enough for it to. I've driven that road since, once, in daylight. I looked behind the barn. Just the usual old equipment, half swallowed in tall grass. Nothing burned, nothing crushed, nothing disturbed. At night, I take a different route home now. Not because I'm scared exactly, more because I don't want to see that glow again, that quiet, unreachable orange, and have it rise like that as if the world around it doesn't matter. The knocking started while Lauren and I were still cleaning up the kitchen. It was a soft, steady tapping, not loud enough to be someone desperate, but too deliberate to be branches or the wind. We both froze at the same time, looking at each other like we were silently asking if the other had heard it. It was just after midnight. We live outside Asheville, up a ways toward the Pisgah foothills, the kind of place where your backyard is more trees than grass, and the neighbors are half a mile away. The night had been calm, warm for early spring, a little muggy, no wind, so the sound felt out of place right away. The tapping came again, this time with a little rhythm to it. We stepped into the living room, which was dark, except for the counter light behind us. The sliding glass door faces our backyard. From where we stood, we could see the shape of 2 figures up against the glass. Small, too small to be adults. Lauren whispered, "Is that kids?" I didn't answer. I just walked closer. 2 children stood outside, side by side, their faces almost pressed to the door. A boy and a girl, maybe around 10 or 11. They both wore plain dark clothing, long sleeves, long pants, like they'd dressed for colder weather than we actually had. Their hair hung flat against their heads, damp from something that wasn't rain. I'd never seen them before. They didn't look like anyone from the houses down the hill. The boy lifted his hand and knocked again, 3 quiet taps, while staring straight into the house. I reached for the wall switch out of habit, but hesitated before actually flipping it. Something about illuminating myself felt wrong. I cleared my throat. "Hey, you 2 okay? Are you lost?" The girl leaned forward slightly. Her voice was small but clear through the glass. can we come in and wait for the lights? I felt Lauren step up behind me. She spoke before I could. What lights? The kids didn't answer. They just stood there, perfectly still. No swaying, no shifting weight, no turning their heads. That was what struck me first, not their appearance, not their weird question, just how unnaturally still they were. I tried again. Where are your parents? Did someone drop you off? Are you hurt? Nothing. Their faces didn't change. Then the boy said, "It's almost time." I felt this pressure build behind my ears, like the air around us changed. Subtle, but real enough that I found myself swallowing to pop my ears. The kitchen light flickered behind us. Maybe we should call someone, Lauren whispered. Before I could answer, the lights in the entire house went out. Everything dropped into black. There wasn't even that warm glow you get from appliances or devices on standby. It was just instant darkness. And in that darkness, outside the glass, a low humming sound rose up. Not mechanical, not electrical, more like a deep vibration coming through the ground itself. Our windows trembled just enough that I felt it in my feet before I heard it in my ears. I backed away from the door on instinct. Lauren grabbed my arm. "What is that?" she whispered. The humming grew stronger, not loud enough to hurt, but deep enough that it made my chest feel tight. The kids were just silhouettes now, backlit faintly by the hazy night sky, but even in that low light I could see their eyes. They were completely black, no whites, no reflectiveness, just two dark emptinesses staring in at us. The girl said again, soft and calm, "We need to come inside." I shook my head, though I wasn't sure they could see it. No, you need to. Just wait. We're calling someone. We have to wait for the lights," the boy said. "It's safer." The humming pulsed like it was breathing. I fumbled in the dark for my phone on the counter, but couldn't see anything. My fingers slid across dishes, a cutting board, then finally grabbed the phone. Dead. Not low battery. Dead. It wouldn't even show the charging icon when I tried the cord. Lauren tried hers. Same thing. The humming steadied into something almost rhythmic. Then, just as suddenly as the power had cut out, the lights snapped back on. Every light in the house at once, and the humming stopped so fast the silence felt sharp. I spun toward the glass door. The kids were gone. 1 second they'd been inches from the glass, faces pressed close enough to fog it slightly. The next they weren't there at all. No movement, no sound, just empty patio. Lauren whispered, "Where did they?" I unlocked the sliding door before she finished. I don't know why. Maybe part of me needed proof that they'd actually been there. I stepped outside onto the deck. The air felt weirdly warm, like the temperature had jumped. The trees didn't move, no insects chirping, no night sounds at all. The yard was visible now in the porch light. At first I didn't see anything unusual. Then Lauren said, "Look, tiny footprints, dozens of them." Leading from the sliding door across the grass, bare feet, small. The sizes didn't match, some larger, some smaller, like multiple kids had walked together. They trailed toward the tree line at the back of the yard, stopping right where the woods started. There were no prints coming from the woods, only going into them. I stood there staring at the trail. The grass wasn't even dewy, so whatever had made the prints must have had damp feet, like they'd stepped out of water. Lauren grabbed my sleeve. "Let's go inside." We locked the door and sat on the couch in the lit-up living room, both of us still listening for the humming or knocking or anything at all. The house felt too bright, but neither of us was willing to turn any lights off. After a while, the normal night noises returned. Crickets, a distant owl, the low hum of the fridge clicking back on. We didn't talk much. Didn't know what to say. Around 2 a.m., when it felt like enough time had passed to call it over, I checked the backyard again from the window. The footprints were still there, darkening in the porch light. No movement in the woods. The next morning, the prints were still visible, though the sun had dried them out. I followed them to the tree line, but didn't step in. The woods felt off somehow, like stepping past the first branch would shift the air again. When the wind kicked up around mid-morning, the grass smoothed itself out and the prints gradually disappeared, bending back into place. By noon, it looked like a normal backyard again. Neither of us found anything else. No torn clothes, no dropped toys, nothing to suggest real children had been there. But we both heard the knocking. We both saw the kids. And we both remember the humming, how it filled the whole yard, like it wasn't coming from the sky or the forest, but from everywhere at once. We still live in the same house, same sliding door, same woods. But when midnight gets close, we check the glass more often than we admit, and we don't open the curtains if we hear tapping. The first time I saw it, I'd been in the air for a little over an hour. I was flying a late cargo run in a Cessna Caravan from Boise to Sacramento, something I'd done hundreds of times. It was just past 11, a clear night, barely any turbulence. The kind of flight where you usually settle into a rhythm, check gauges, monitor comms, sip coffee that tastes like burnt dust, and hope the headwinds stay mild. I remember hearing my own breathing louder than usual, which was strange considering the drone of the engine. Sometimes long flights mess with your perception like that. You get inside your own head. I was passing over a stretch of forested foothills when I noticed a light off my right wing. At first, I thought it was another aircraft, maybe someone cruising at a similar altitude on a parallel route. But the light didn't blink. It didn't behave like any nav lights I knew. It was a steady white glow, small but sharp, and it kept perfect pace with me. I checked my altimeter, I checked my GPS, everything looked normal. The light stayed at the same relative distance, maybe a few hundred yards out, close enough that I should have seen shape or structure behind it. But all I saw was the glow. Boise Center, Caravan 4689er, I said, trying to keep my voice level. Do you have any traffic off my right side? A few seconds of quiet, just static hiss. 4689er. Negative contact. No traffic in your vicinity. I looked again, still there, unblinking, dead still relative to me. If I banked even slightly, the thing adjusted perfectly. I thought maybe fatigue was screwing with my depth perception. I pulled my eyes away from it, counted to 3, looked back. It felt closer, not by much, maybe 20 yards, but it felt like it. And right then, the cabin lights flickered, all of them. Not a violent surge, just a soft dimming, like someone slid a brightness dial down and up again. Boise Center, I'm seeing some kind of light pacing me. I've got electrical flickers in the cabin. Say again? They asked. Before I could answer, the cabin lights dipped again. A longer fade this time, maybe 2 full seconds. My stomach clenched like the air pressure had dropped, but the instruments didn't show anything unusual. I tilted the yoke slightly, testing it. The light matched me instantly. Aircraft don't do that. Not without me seeing wings, structure, something. I kept my voice steady. Center, is there any kind of atmospheric interference in my area? 4689er, conditions are reported calm. The light edged closer. Just a little, maybe another 20 yards. Enough that it felt intentional. Cabin lights dimmed a 3rd time. This one was the longest yet. Everything inside the cockpit went from warm yellow to almost pitch black for about 3 seconds. The instrument panel held steady, no loss of power there, but the internal lighting dipped to nothing. During that blackout, the glow outside my window looked brighter, or maybe it actually was brighter. It was hard to tell through the glass in the dark. I felt something in my chest, not fear exactly, more like a deep, hollow pressure as if someone pressed a fist against my sternum from the inside. Not painful, just wrong. The cabin lights came back. I blinked a few times, trying to clear the weird haze from my eyes. The object hadn't moved. It stayed locked in that fixed distance, like it was tethered to me. I asked Center again if they could see anything on radar. Negative, they said. No targets except you. I didn't respond right away. I was trying to decide whether to climb, descend, or hold course. The idea of turning toward the thing made my skin crawl, but turning away felt pointless. How do you outmaneuver something that shadows every move? I chose altitude, a slow climb. The object climbed with me, perfectly synchronized. Cabin lights dimmed again. This time, the dim took longer to resolve. 5 seconds, maybe 6. And during that time, the glow outside flared fiercely. Not in brightness exactly, but in clarity. It sharpened, forming a sort of soft-edged circle. A disc? Maybe. Hard to say. The edges were too clean, too even, to be a natural reflection. I caught myself gripping the yoke too tight and forced my hands to relax. 4689er, Center said. Your transponder just blinked. Do you copy? Copy, I said. Everything's mostly stable on my end. I didn't want to say more. Not while it was still right there. I leveled out and the object leveled out with me, still holding that awful fixed distance. I could feel it now. Not physically, but in that hard-to-explain sense of awareness. like I could tell it was watching me, though that made no logical sense. Then it drifted closer, just a bit, maybe 10 yards. The cabin lights dimmed again, hard enough that the overhead panel clicked softly, like the bulbs were straining. The pressure in my chest tightened. I didn't speak, didn't breathe, didn't move. The glow hovered there, steady as a heartbeat. Then something changed. Not visually, nothing about the light itself shifted, but the air in the cockpit felt thicker, like humidity rising fast. My ears popped twice in quick succession. A faint hum started somewhere behind me, so low I wasn't sure it was real. The glow crept closer by another few yards. The lights dimmed to nearly nothing. I expected fear to hit me full force, but instead there was this strange numbness, like my brain refused to process it fully. My vision tunneled. The hum intensified, not louder, just deeper. I opened my mouth to call center, but no sound came out. For 5 or 6 long seconds, everything felt suspended, like the aircraft wasn't moving, like I wasn't breathing, like the glow outside was the only living thing in the sky. Then, without warning, the cabin lights flicked back to full brightness. The pressure vanished, the hum stopped, and the glow was farther away. Not gone, just farther, a few hundred yards this time. I stared at it, afraid to blink. It didn't move, it didn't pulse, it didn't fade. It just held that new distance, as if something had changed its mind. I tried to radio center. Object is, it's moved farther from me. Say again, they said, like they hadn't heard me properly. And maybe they hadn't. My voice sounded faint, even to my own ears. I flew in silence after that. I kept glancing over at the thing every few seconds, but it just trailed me at that larger distance. No more flickering, no more pressure, no more dimming lights. 10 minutes later, exactly 10 minutes, according to my clock, the glow began rising, slowly at first, then faster, straight up, like it was being pulled on a string. It climbed until it was a tiny speck. Then it winked out, not faded, disappeared, just gone. I told center I'd lost sight of the light. They acknowledged it like I'd reported seeing a shooting star, routine, casual. The rest of the flight was normal, perfect even. The landing in Sacramento was smooth. Offloading the cargo felt strangely grounding. Like it pulled me back into reality. But the whole time I felt this lingering pressure in my chest, a ghost of the sensation from earlier. I didn't write an official report about it. I knew how it would sound. Unidentified light pacing aircraft caused electrical anomalies. Not something I wanted attached to my name or my license. I went back home the next morning, slept until noon. When I woke up, the pressure in my chest was gone. But sometimes, when I'm flying at night and the cabin lights flicker, just for a moment, I find myself glancing out the right side window expecting that steady white glow to be there again. So far it hasn't been. But the part that bothers me is how precisely it held that distance, how closely it watched every tiny adjustment I made, like it already knew what I was going to do before I did it. My phone's compass started going crazy about 15 minutes after I turned off the main highway. I was on one of those narrow country roads outside of Tulare, the kind where the fields go on forever, and the only lights are distant farmhouses or the occasional truck passing in the opposite direction. It was late, close to 1 a.m., and I was coming back from visiting a friend in Visalia. I don't know why I even had the compass open. I guess I was just checking if I'd missed a turn somewhere. At first, I thought the phone was glitching. The little red arrow spun all the way around, paused, then whipped back the other way like it was stuck on something. I tapped the screen twice. The arrow kept jittering, pointing in every direction except the actual one I was facing. I slowed down and held the phone up in front of me just to make sure I wasn't bumping it around. Still spinning. My signal bars were dead, not low, gone completely. That wasn't unusual for the area, but the compass thing threw me. I remember saying, "Okay, that's weird," out loud, and that's when I noticed something through the windshield. It was small at first, a bright point of light near the horizon, just above the tops of the distant orchards. I thought it was a plane, but it wasn't moving the way a plane should. It drifted sideways, not angled, sideways, parallel to the ground, slow and smooth, like someone sliding a coin across a table. I pulled off onto the dirt shoulder without really thinking. Dust rose around the car, lit by my headlights. The object was still there. It didn't blink or pulse, just a steady white glow. maybe the size of a bright star, but too low and too clear to be one. I turned off the radio to hear better, which was pointless because there was nothing to hear. Just the engine idling, the faint ticking from the cooling vents, and this strange quiet that felt heavier than any normal night out there. The light slid a few inches across the horizon, then stopped. For a moment, I genuinely thought it might be a drone. People film fields all the time. Maybe someone was checking irrigation or doing night mapping or whatever farmers do with drones now. But I'd never seen one move like that, smooth, controlled, with no noise at all. I opened the car door and stepped out. The cold hit me fast. There was a sharp breeze coming off the fields, carrying that dusty smell the Central Valley always has at night. I leaned against the door and watched the light. It started drifting again. Same sideways motion, slow as before. I tried to line it up with something in the distance, a tree, a fence, anything, to see how far away it might have been. It was hard to tell. It looked like it was miles out, but still too bright to be that far. I held up my phone again. The compass arrow spun even faster now, making full circles without pausing. I tried to film the light, but the camera wouldn't focus. The screen kept blurring in and out like I was shaking, even though I wasn't. Then the object stopped a second time. This time, it stayed still long enough for me to really look at it. The glow was white, but not like a bulb or LED. It didn't flare or bleed around the edges. The edges were sharp, defined, like the light belonged to a solid shape I couldn't see. I realized then that everything around me had gone quiet. Not quiet as in no cars or coyotes, quiet like the air itself wasn't moving anymore. The breeze had stopped. The insects had stopped. I couldn't hear anything except the soft hum of my engine. I shut the engine off. The silence got even heavier. I don't know how else to describe it. It was like someone pressed their hands over my ears, but without the pressure. The light jerked. Not much, just a tiny, sharp movement upward. A jump, almost. But it was the first time it had moved in anything other than that slow slide. My chest tightened. I thought about getting back in the car, but something kept me watching. It slid sideways again, but this time faster. Then it slowed, then sped up. The motion didn't feel random, not exactly. More like it was following invisible lines. My compass arrow spun so fast the phone vibrated. I lowered it, and when I looked back at the horizon, the object wasn't where it had been. It was higher now. Not far, but noticeably. Maybe a few degrees. I blinked, and in that blink, it moved again. Not a jump this time, just a quick shift to the left, almost like it had been waiting for me to look away. Something about that made my stomach twist, like whatever it was didn't want its movement seen closely. I backed up toward my car door without turning around. The gravel crunched under my shoes. That tiny sound felt too loud in the dead air. Just before I got in, the light started drifting toward me. Not directly, more diagonally, like it was closing the distance but keeping low above the orchards. It didn't speed up or get erratic. It came in the same slow glide it had used before, like it had all the time in the world. I slid into the driver's seat and shut the door quietly, even though I knew that didn't matter. The object kept drifting closer. I watched it through the windshield, trying not to panic. My breathing got fast enough to fog the glass. I decided to start the car, even if it meant breaking the silence. The engine turned over normally. The light paused. I don't mean it stopped drifting. I mean it paused midair, like someone pressed a button that froze it in place. My headlights caught dust floating in the still air. The object didn't move an inch. I put the car in drive and eased forward. The object rose. Just a little, like it was adjusting. I pressed the gas harder. The tires spun a moment in the loose dirt before finding traction. I pulled back onto the road faster than I meant to. My hands were shaking so badly I almost veered into the grass on the other side. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The object was behind me now, still hovering in the same spot above the orchards. It didn't chase me. It didn't move. It just stayed there, perfectly still, like it was watching. My compass arrow finally stopped spinning. It pointed steadily north as if nothing had happened. I didn't look back again. I drove until I hit the first gas station on the edge of town. Only then did I let myself breathe normally. I parked under the bright canopy lights and checked the sky. Nothing. Just stars and a faint haze from the city. My phone had full signal again, compass working perfectly. I waited there for almost 20 minutes. half expecting that white light to drift over the fields toward the station, steady as ever. It didn't. On the rest of the drive home, I kept checking the mirrors, scanning the horizon, watching for any sideways drift or sudden shift of white against the dark. Nothing followed. Nothing reappeared. But the compass thing stuck with me more than the light did. I've used that road a dozen times since, and the compass has never acted like that again. It only happened in those exact minutes, on that exact stretch of road, right before I saw something drifting sideways through the sky, like it wasn't bound to the same rules everything else is. I don't leave the main highway at night anymore. There's no reason to risk driving past that spot again. The outage happened halfway through a storm that had blown in faster than anything I'd seen in our part of Ohio. I'd been sitting in my living room with a flashlight balanced on my knee, listening to the wind rattle the siding and watching the trees lean way too far over the yard. The power had already flickered twice, so I wasn't surprised when it finally went. Everything clicked off in this clean, sudden way. No fade, no buzz, just darkness. I remember standing and checking the window, more out of habit than anything else. My house sits just off a 2-lane road with only a few other places in sight, and during storms it always feels like the world shrinks down to the glow from your own window. Except now, there wasn't any glow. It was completely black out there. I grabbed my phone, but it was at 9% and going fast, because reception tanks when the weather gets like that. I turned it to airplane mode and set it face down so it wouldn't die on me. The only sound in the house was the wind and the occasional creak of the front porch railing. I was heading toward the kitchen to check on the candles when something outside changed, not loudly, but definitely. The darkness wasn't as dark. It shifted in this strange, gradual way, like when your eyes adjust in a movie theater, but quicker and with no obvious source. For a second, I honestly thought my neighbors had turned on some huge floodlight, but the water-streaked window showed nothing like that. No beam, no visible point of origin, just a deep, muted glow covering everything, like the sky itself was backlit. A weird coppery color almost. I stepped onto the porch, hand on the rail because the boards were slick from the rain blowing in sideways. The air smelled sharp, like metal. The wind had dropped off faster than it should have, like someone had shut it down, and the only sound left was distant thunder behind the hills. The glow got brighter. Not by much, but enough that I could see the wet shine on the road and the silhouettes of the maples at the end of my driveway. It wasn't like normal lightning where everything snaps white. This was steadier and lower, like it came from behind the clouds instead of inside them. My eyes kept trying to adjust, but every time they caught up, the color shifted slightly again. And then I noticed how quiet everything was. No tree branches slapping the roof. No distant hum of generators kicking on at the farms down the road. No rain hitting the gutters. Just this soft, buzzing silence, like when you plug your ears underwater, but can still feel pressure around you. I don't know how long I stood there before checking my watch. The second hand was still moving, but it felt like it was dragging itself along. At some point I realized the glow wasn't staying uniform. There were places where it thickened or rippled, just barely. Like waves under ice. I stared at the sky, trying to see if it was just the storm clouds moving, but the shapes didn't line up with the cloud layers. They were broader, slower, too smooth. No edges, nothing you could point at and say, that's a cloud. It reminded me of watching headlights through a frosted bathroom window, diffuse, shapeless, but somehow moving with intention. When the glow peaked, the whole landscape looked unreal. Colors washed out, shadows soft and stretched. My own hand in front of me seemed flatter than it should have, like depth was missing. That's when I heard the hum. It wasn't loud. It was more like a vibration I could feel in my ribs before I heard it in my ears. A low, steady tone with no wobble or echo. It didn't match the storm, didn't match anything mechanical. It just existed, perfectly even. My entire chest felt like someone was resting a palm against it and pushing, not enough to hurt, but enough to feel unnatural. I should have gone inside, but I just stood there listening. My porch light clicked once, just a tiny mechanical clatter inside the fixture, but it didn't turn on. The glow in the sky flickered the same moment the light clicked. Only once, but sharply like something misfiring. I checked my watch again because I swear I could feel the seconds stretching. I counted in my head, matching the sweep of the hand. When I reached 30, the hum stopped. Not faded. Stopped, like a cord being cut. The glow went out the same instant, snapping back to total darkness so fast that I lost my balance for half a second. The normal storm sounds rushed in again. Wind, rain, leaves whipping around the side of the house. Everything sounded louder than before, like my ears had been blocked and suddenly cleared. Then, with this almost theatrical timing, every light inside the house flicked back on at once. Lamps, oven clock, fridge hum, everything. Not flickering, not powering up slowly, just on. The sudden brightness behind me felt almost aggressive after the darkness. I turned and saw every light glowing like nothing had happened except the digital clocks. They were all reset, blinking 12. Nothing else looked out of place. No branches on the porch, no blown fuses, no scorch marks, just normal power returning. I went inside and shut the door. The lights seemed too bright and too steady, like they were trying hard to act normal. I kept thinking maybe other people had seen it too, that maybe I'd hear backup generators or see neighbors coming outside. But the houses down the road were dark except for their porch lights, which clicked on only after the power returned. No one else opened their doors. No one walked out onto the road. Just me standing there in a washed-out world that had suddenly snapped back to normal. I checked my phone, still at 8%, which wasn't right given how long I'd had it awake earlier. The storm moved off quicker than expected, and by 2 in the morning, the sky had cleared enough to see a few stars through the remaining clouds. Everything smelled normal again. Wet grass, mud, distant wood smoke. I didn't sleep. I just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, waiting for some trace of copper light to bleed through the curtains again. Nothing did. The next morning, the local news talked about the outage, but blamed it on a transformer issue 2 towns over. No one mentioned the sky. No one mentioned anything about the 30-second glow. The clocks in my house were all wrong by different amounts when I tried to reset them. My microwave said 7:14, the oven said 7:09. My phone said 7:21. And when I stepped onto the porch to check the weather, the boards still felt cold. Not from the storm, but from something else. Something I couldn't put a name to. I stood there for a while looking up. The sky was washed blue and ordinary, but I kept remembering those soft ripples behind the clouds. The hum in my chest. The way the world paused and then resumed like a switch had been flipped, exactly 30 seconds. The glow slid along the top of the backyard fence while I was washing a mug at the kitchen sink. Faint but steady, like someone had a flashlight pointed sideways from the other yard. I paused with the sponge in my hand, water running over my knuckles, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It was close to midnight. The house was quiet, except for the low hum of the fridge and the pipes creaking the way they always did when the hot water ran too long. Outside, it was one of those heavy summer nights where the air felt thick even through the open window. No wind. No bugs, just still. The glow moved slowly, tracing the top edge of the fence, never dipping or rising. It didn't flicker like a normal light. It just traveled, smooth and deliberate. I leaned closer to the window. The backyard was dark except for that pale thread of brightness, barely strong enough to light the wood. It wasn't blue or yellow, just pale, almost colorless. My first thought was it was Gomez next door messing around again. He worked late and liked to tinker with weird yard lights and solar panels, but this didn't behave like anything he'd put up before. I turned off the faucet and dried my hands on a towel, listening. No footsteps, no voices, no music, just quiet. The glow paused near the corner of the fence, sitting there like it had reached a point of interest. I stood there, staring, feeling stupid for not knowing what to make of it. Then it started drifting upward. It didn't climb like a flashlight beam or bounce like a reflection. It simply lifted, the top of it separating cleanly from the fence until it was hovering a few feet above the yard. My stomach tightened without any obvious reason. I stepped away from the sink and grabbed my hoodie from the back of a chair, slipping it on even though the kitchen felt warm. The air outside suddenly seemed colder just looking at it. I unlatched the back door and stepped onto the porch. The yard smelled damp, like the grass hadn't fully dried. The glow now hovered near the middle of the yard, 4 or 5 feet off the ground, drifting toward the center as if it had somewhere to be. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding weak in the open air. No response. The light gave no sign of reacting. I walked down the porch steps, shoes crunching lightly against the gravel. Even the gravel sounded too loud in the quiet. The glow continued its slow path, crossing over the patch where my dog usually slept during the day. He wasn't there. He'd gone upstairs hours earlier and refused to come back down, which I hadn't thought much about at the time. As I followed it a few feet into the yard, I realized something else felt off. The usual background noise was gone. No distant traffic, no rustling leaves, no passing car headlights from the far road, just silence. Then a faint, low hum crept into the air, so soft I almost thought I imagined it. It wasn't loud enough to hear clearly, more like a vibration in the bones of my jaw. The glow reached the center of the yard and stopped. I stood there about 10 feet away, unsure of what I was doing. The light wasn't blinding. It wasn't warm. It just hovered, perfectly still, a soft oval shape that pulsed slightly like a slow breath. A shadow flickered once across the fence behind it, but nothing passed between us that I could see. I glanced up at the sky. Clouds hung low and dark, too thick to see any stars. The air above the light looked faintly distorted, like heat rising off pavement, even though the night was relatively cool. The humming deepened slightly, making the metal railing of the porch tremble just enough for me to notice. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out instinctively. No notifications, no missed calls, just the screen lighting up for no reason. The glow drifted again, rising slowly, higher than the fence now, lifting soundlessly into the air. I tilted my head back, tracking it. It made no noise as it climbed. It didn't wobble. It didn't change shape, just moved straight up like it was being reeled in by something invisible. The hum softened as it went higher. I took a few cautious steps forward, squinting, trying to get a better look. The edges of it began to blur slightly, fading as it neared the bottom of the cloud cover. And then it slipped into the clouds and disappeared entirely. No fade out, just gone. The hum vanished at the same moment. The yard went back to normal darkness. The crickets hesitantly resumed their noise a few moments later, like they were testing if it was safe. I stood there for a while longer, heartbeat loud in my ears, staring up at the blank sky. Nothing moved. Nothing returned. Eventually, I backed toward the porch, re-entered the house, and locked the door. I hovered by the window for a while, watching the fence, waiting for the glow to reappear. It didn't. When I checked my phone again, I noticed the time had somehow jumped ahead almost 15 minutes from when I'd first seen the glow, though it hadn't felt that long at all. I slept poorly that night. Every small sound made me sit up, half expecting the faint light to press against the blinds or slide across the wall. Morning came like nothing had happened. Dew on the grass, fence unchanged, no sign of anything unusual. But every now and then, when I washed dishes late after that, I caught myself glancing over the fence, half waiting for that soft, pale line to drift across the wood again. The air started feeling wrong about 10 minutes into the trail, like I'd walked into a pocket of wet pressure that hadn't been there a second earlier. It was late dusk, that weird in-between where the sky still held some faded orange, but the woods were already going dark. I slowed down, mostly because my chest felt tight, like I'd just climbed a steep hill even though the ground was flat. This was the Elkwood Trail north of Crestline, a quiet stretch most people only used on weekends. I'd come out after work because I needed to clear my head. My name's Marin Caldwell, and I'd lived near these woods long enough to know how they usually felt. This wasn't it. I stopped and listened. No birds, no distant road noise. Even the leaves had gone still. I remember thinking it felt like the whole forest had paused, like when a fridge suddenly stops humming and the silence hits you all at once. I kept walking anyway. Then I saw it. Just above the tree line against the dimming sky, something wide and dark slid into view. Not fast, not slow either. It didn't look like any aircraft I'd ever seen. It was round, but not perfectly. More like a flattened disc, dark enough that it swallowed the last bit of light behind it. I thought it was a low cloud at first, but clouds don't move like that. It drifted sideways, smooth and deliberate, no rotation, no flicker, just steady. I stood there frozen, heart picking up speed slowly instead of all at once. I'd seen planes from this trail before, helicopters sometimes. This was silent, no engine, no wind, just that heavy air and this shape blocking part of the sky like it didn't belong there. A little voice in my head kept trying to logic it away. Drone, reflection, some weird optical trick. But even as I thought that, the air seemed to thicken more, pressing against my ears until everything felt slightly muted. The disc hovered for maybe 10 seconds, long enough for my hands to go damp and my mouth to dry out. I noticed the tops of the trees under it weren't swaying, even though a moment ago there'd been a slight breeze. Then it started drifting again, moving away from me, deeper into the woods. It faded behind the hill slope and just vanished. When it was gone, the birds didn't come back. The forest didn't relax, the quiet stayed. I looked down at my phone, mostly to check the time, but the screen felt oddly dim even at full brightness. 7:42 p.m., I swore it had been just after 7 when I'd seen the shape. I stood there longer than I meant to, trying to get my breathing steady again. I finally forced myself to keep walking, but something felt off in a way I couldn't explain. The trail looked the same, dirt, packed hard, pine needles lining the edges, but I kept getting this sense of being watched. Not like eyes on me, more like awareness. Like something had registered I was there. A few minutes later, I heard a faint clicking sound above the canopy. Not mechanical exactly, but rhythmic, repeating every few seconds. I stopped again and tilted my head up, scanning for anything that could have made it. There was nothing. No birds, no visible shape, just that slow click, 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 and then sudden silence. I laughed once, nervous, mostly at myself. "Get it together," I muttered, even though no one could hear me. The trail curved ahead, and when I passed the bend, I realized the light had shifted more than it should have. The sky looked darker, almost like time had jumped forward. My phone now read 8:06. I hadn't been standing still that long. My stomach tightened again. I started walking faster, every sense sharpened. That heavy feeling in the air hadn't lifted, and the hairs on my arms stayed raised like something cold had brushed me, even though the evening was still warm. Halfway back toward the trailhead, I noticed a low humming sound, so faint I almost missed it. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, like the ground itself was vibrating just beneath perception. I stopped and crouched, pressing my palm briefly against the dirt path. The faint vibration was real, subtle but there. "Okay," I whispered, more to hear a voice than anything else. A few seconds later, far behind me, between the trees, a pale glow flickered once. Just a quick pulse, soft and colorless like moonlight on fog. When I spun around, it was gone. I made the decision then to leave. Not run, not sprint. I didn't want to feel like prey, but I definitely picked up the pace. As I walked, I kept glancing over my shoulder. Every rustle made my pulse jerk. More than once, I thought I saw movement through the branches that didn't line up with wind or shadow. Shapes that seemed just a little too smooth to be natural. By the time I reached the parking area, the sky had dimmed almost completely. The air pressure finally eased slightly, like whatever density had settled on the forest was loosening its grip. My car sat where I'd left it. Everything normal. Too normal. When I unlocked the door and got in, my phone vibrated with a missed call from my brother, Elias. The timestamp said 7:55. I checked the voicemail. "Hey, Mayor, you good? You called me and didn't say anything, just some weird static and breathing noise. Call me back." I stared at the screen. I hadn't called him. I hadn't even touched my phone during the walk except to check the time. My call log showed an outgoing call to Elias at 7:54 that lasted 30 seconds. I sat there for a long moment, engine still off, the quiet of the woods pressing in on all sides. On the drive home, I kept scanning the sky through the windshield. Everything looked empty. Just fading clouds and the last trace of daylight dissolving behind the mountains. At home, I showered and tried to shake it off, but the pressure feeling lingered faintly in my temples, like I'd spent too long at a high altitude. I checked my trail app out of habit. It showed my GPS path cutting off for about 12 minutes, right around where I'd seen the disc. After that, the line resumed closer to the trailhead, like I'd been moved forward without walking the in-between. Just before bed, I stood by the window and looked out toward the dark tree lines in the distance. The sky was clear, stars faint but visible. I half expected to see that shape again, hovering quietly, waiting. There was nothing, just normal night. Still, the quiet didn't feel the same as it used to. It no longer felt empty. The sound started while I was sitting on a flat rock with my shoes off, toes in the cold edge of the lake, just trying to relax after a long week. It was past 10, maybe closer to 11, and the whole shoreline was quiet, except for insects and the occasional splash from something farther out. There wasn't a breeze. The water looked like dark glass. Then I heard this soft mechanical noise above me. Not loud, not sudden, just a steady, low whirring, like something spinning slowly in the air. At first I figured it was a drone from someone's cabin across the water, but it didn't move like one. I tilted my head back and looked up. The stars above the lake were bright and clear, but right over the middle section, a perfectly round patch of darkness drifted across them. It wasn't a cloud. The edges were too clean. It was like someone had cut out a piece of the sky and slid something solid in front of it. The shadow moved slowly, steady, no wobble, no flicker, and the sound lined up with it perfectly. My name is Jonah Kellerman. I'd driven out to Lake Dorian that night because it was usually empty and calm. Just an old access road, a small dock, and a few dusty benches. I'd been here dozens of times before, never saw anything strange. It was always boring in the best way. I stood up slowly, gravel crunching under my heel, and kept my eyes on that strange round break in the stars. The mechanical sound stayed the same tone, like a distant motor running at the same speed. It didn't cast any light, just the faint absence of stars where it passed. I walked a few steps closer to the water, trying to see if I could make out anything reflective or shiny, but the surface stayed dark and calm. Hello? I didn't know why I said it, but the words slipped out anyway. No answer, just the soft whirring. The shape continued drifting overhead, crossing from left to right at a pace that felt way too controlled to be random. I watched it until it slipped behind the dark outline of the pine trees on the opposite shore and completely vanished. The sound faded a few seconds later, gradually, not suddenly. Silence rushed back in, louder than before. I stood there for a long while, scanning the sky like an idiot, waiting for it to come back. Nothing did. Just normal stars, normal night. I told myself it was probably some weird reflection or a trick of the clouds, even though that made no sense. After another minute, I forced myself to sit back down and try to shake it off. But the calm felt fake now. 10 minutes passed, then 15. I started hearing small sounds behind me on the tree line, not footsteps, more like something brushing through tall grass or low branches. I turned a couple times but didn't see anyone. The air felt heavier, still no wind. I checked my phone. No signal, which wasn't surprising this far out, but the battery had somehow dropped from 70% to 40 since I'd gotten there. I didn't remember using it much. The mechanical sound came back. Softer this time, higher pitch, almost delicate. I looked up again, heart already racing, and saw the same perfect round shadow sliding slowly across the stars, but this time it was lower, closer to the treetops. The shape didn't change at all. No blinking lights, no visible structure, just a moving absence. I found myself stepping backward without really thinking, gravel crunching louder now. The sound hummed steadily above me. It felt close, too close. A ripple spread across the lake directly below the shadow, even though the water everywhere else stayed smooth. The ripple formed a clean circle, expanding slowly outward as if something invisible hovered right above it. I whispered, "What is that?" The shadow paused, not stopped entirely, just slowed almost to nothing, hanging right there over the middle of the water. The whirring shifted slightly, the pitch adjusting by a tiny fraction, like something recalibrating. My skin prickled all over my arms. I could feel my pulse in my throat. The night smelled different suddenly, faintly metallic, like cold coins. Then the shadow resumed moving, sliding further across the sky. It passed over the far shore and faded into nothing again. No dramatic exit, just gone. I waited, breathing shallow, afraid if I moved too quickly it would come back sharper or louder. When nothing happened for a few minutes, I finally forced myself to move toward my car, parked near the dirt road entrance. As I walked away, the sound started again behind me. This time it didn't come from above, it came from somewhere behind the trees lining the parking area. A low, steady, mechanical hum, closer than before, too close to ignore. I stopped and turned slowly. The trees were dark outlines, no movement visible between them. But the humming became more distinct, like metal slowly sliding past metal. I didn't see any light, no shadow this time. Just that sound. My instincts screamed to leave, but my body hesitated, frozen in place for a second too long. I forced my legs forward and headed to my car, each step heavy and wrong. When I reached the driver's door, the hum cut out completely. Then the night dropped into absolute silence again, way too perfect. I got inside fast, locked the doors without thinking, and started the engine. The dashboard lights flickered once, dimming slightly, then returned to normal. As I pulled onto the narrow dirt road, my headlights swept across the tree line. For the briefest second, something circular seemed darker among the branches, like a hole in the night itself. Then I blinked, and it was gone. The rest of the drive home felt unreal. The radio wouldn't tune properly, only static, so I shut it off. The woods along the road looked thicker than usual, shadows stretching in awkward angles. When I reached my apartment, I didn't even bother turning on the porch light right away. I just stood there for a second, staring up at the sky. Everything looked normal, stars unchanged, no moving round void, no sound. Inside, I locked the door, double-checked it, and sat on my couch, listening to my own breathing until it finally settled. Later, around 2 in the morning, I checked my car dash cam, half expecting to see something unusual. There was nothing dramatic, just the dark road, my headlights, a normal drive. Except at one point near the lake, the image warped slightly for about 3 seconds, as if something passed close enough to distort the air. The audio picked up a faint rhythmic hum, barely noticeable unless I listened carefully. By morning, the lake looked normal again when I passed it on my way to work. Still water, still quiet. But when night came, I didn't go anywhere near it. I stayed inside, curtains half drawn, occasionally glancing at the sky through the window. Every now and then, if the night got too quiet, I almost thought I could hear that faint mechanical tone again, humming somewhere far above, drifting patiently across the dark. I was walking the gravel path along Pritchard Creek when the fog swallowed everything past a few yards. It was one of those early mornings where the air felt damp enough to stick to your clothes. I had my hood up, hands in my pockets, just trying to clear my head before work. Then I saw the lights. They hovered ahead of me at eye level, maybe 30 or 40 feet away, a small cluster of dim pale dots hanging in the fog. Not bright like headlights, not blinking, just steady and soft like battery lights that had been left on too long. I slowed without thinking. My shoes crunched softly on the gravel, the sound swallowed by the thick air. The lights looked like they belonged to something standing there, but there was no outline, no shape, nothing but fog and those faint points. I stopped moving. The lights didn't. They stayed exactly where they were, as if they had been placed there instead of floating. My heart beat harder, not from panic yet, just that uneasy feeling when something didn't fit. I shifted my weight, and the gravel clicked under my heel. The lights stayed still. No sway, no drift. "Hello?" I called out, immediately feeling stupid. No answer came back, just the quiet of fog and the faint drip of water from trees along the creek. I took another slow step forward. The lights looked closer now, but I couldn't tell if that was real or just the way fog warped distance. A breeze moved through the path, and the fog thinned slightly. In that moment, the lights rose straight up, smooth and silent, like they were being lifted on an invisible string. They climbed into the gray and vanished. I stood there, staring at the empty space where they had been, my mouth slightly open. The air felt colder for a second. I waited. Nothing else happened. The fog closed back in, and the clear spot filled again, like whatever I saw had never been there. I shook my head and started walking again, slower now, eyes scanning every direction. A few minutes passed. I checked my phone. No signal, which wasn't that weird out here, but I usually at least had one bar. It said 6:12 a.m. I could have sworn it had been earlier. My steps sounded too loud in the quiet. Somewhere to my left, a bird cried out and then went silent. The creek made a low, steady trickle beside the path, but even that sounded farther away than it should have. As I walked, the fog thickened again, wrapping around the trees and low brush. The world shrank to a bubble of damp air and shadow. That's when I noticed a faint reflection on the wet gravel, like a weak shimmer that didn't match the dull light of the overcast sky. I looked up and saw another faint glow, different from before, wider this time and more spread out, hovering just above the bushes off the side of the trail. It didn't move. It didn't pulse. It just existed. I froze again. My name is Caleb Mora, and I'm not the kind of person who jumps at every little thing. I grew up hunting, camping, walking trails before sunrise. I knew what night looked like and what fog did to light. This wasn't any of that. The glow shifted slightly, like a slow breath. I swallowed and stepped back. The crunch of gravel echoed too sharply. The glow didn't move. It didn't react. I pulled my phone out and tried to record, but the camera only showed white blur, no faint light at all. A low hum started to fill the air. It wasn't loud. It was more like a vibration you felt in your chest than heard. My jacket brushed against my arms as a thin breeze passed over me, smelling slightly metallic, like rain on old pipes. The glow dimmed, then returned, then dimmed again. Behind me, somewhere on the path, I heard a soft footstep. Just one. I turned quickly. Nothing was there. My heart thumped harder now. I turned back toward the light and noticed it had shifted closer to the ground, like it was lowering itself. The hum deepened slightly. I felt stupid standing there, but I couldn't make myself move. Every instinct I had told me to leave, and my legs wouldn't cooperate. Then the glow blinked out. Not faded, not drifted. Just gone. In its place, the bushes looked normal again. Wet leaves, dark branches, fog. The hum stopped at the same instant. I stood there breathing hard, listening for any sign that I wasn't alone. Nothing answered back. The world settled into an uncomfortable stillness. I checked my phone again. 6:27 a.m. 15 minutes had passed, and it felt like maybe 5. I forced my feet to move, turning back toward the trailhead. Each step felt heavy, like the ground resisted me. The fog didn't clear. If anything, it thickened, curling around my legs as if it had weight. Halfway back, the sound of my footsteps changed. The gravel crunch no longer matched my pace. It sounded like something behind me was stepping slightly out of sync. I stopped. The crunch stopped too. I turned slowly, still no one there. My breath looked thicker in the air now. The fog swirled softly around my shoulders. A few yards ahead, another dim cluster of lights appeared, lower than before, nearly touching the path. 3 small points, arranged unevenly, floating just above the gravel. They didn't resemble eyes. They didn't resemble any tool or gear I could think of. They were just there. The air buzzed faintly again, that low vibration coming back. I stood frozen as the lights drifted sideways, slow and smooth, keeping the same distance from me as I shifted my stance. They moved like they were watching, measuring. I whispered, "No," though I wasn't sure who I was saying it to. The fog rolled in a sudden wave, briefly blocking them. When it slid away, the lights shot straight up once more and vanished into the gray ceiling above the trees. The hum lingered a second longer, then cut off clean. Everything returned to the normal sounds of morning. A crow called somewhere far off. The faint rustle of leaves came back. My shoes scraped lightly when I stepped back. I didn't look behind me again. I just walked faster until the path opened back onto the parking area where my car sat waiting, covered in thin dew. When I climbed inside and shut the door, the world felt solid again, like I had crossed an invisible line. I sat there, breathing for a while, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching the fog roll past the windshield. My phone antenna ticked back to life. 1 bar, then 2. The time read 6:31 a.m. I drove away slowly, eyes scanning the rearview mirror, half expecting to see pale dots hovering on the edge of the road. There was nothing, just fog and wet pavement stretching back into quiet light. I was taking out the trash when the porch railing started to tremble under my hand. It wasn't a heavy shake, just this low vibration rolling through the metal like something distant but strong was moving under the ground or the air. I paused with the bag halfway over the bin, listening. The night had been quiet and sticky, one of those late summer evenings where the air felt thick and warm even after dark. Cicadas buzzed in the trees behind the house, and the street was empty, except for the soft glow of porch lights and the occasional moth bumping into them. Then the humming came. It wasn't loud. It sounded more like pressure than noise, a steady tone that made the wooden boards under my bare feet feel faintly warm. The porch light flickered once, and I looked up automatically. A pinpoint of light shot across the sky. It moved fast, perfectly straight, like a spark dragged across black glass. No blinking, no tail, no sound. Just a sharp white point slicing from one side of the sky to the other, and then it vanished. The humming faded a second later, leaving the night feeling hollow. I stood there for a while longer than made sense, trash bag forgotten, trying to figure out what I'd just seen. Planes passed over this part of town sometimes, but they didn't move like that. Drones made noise. Satellites didn't look that bright, and sure as hell didn't make railings vibrate. I shook it off, dropped the bag into the bin, and went back inside, locking the door behind me. My name's Marisol Pena, and I lived in a quiet little development outside of Albuquerque. My boyfriend Theo wasn't home that night. He'd been working late at the auto shop, and the house felt extra empty without him moving around. I tried to go back to normal. I rinsed a cup in the sink, scrolled on my phone for a bit, and even turned on the TV for background noise. But every few minutes, I found myself glancing toward the front window, half expecting the sky to do something else strange. Around an hour later, something made the dog start whining. Luna was usually calm, the kind of dog that barely barked unless the mail truck pulled up. Now she stood near the doorway, ears pinned back, staring at the ceiling as if she was tracking something moving above it. A faint buzzing filled the air again, softer this time, like it couldn't quite reach full volume. I called her name. She didn't move. The living room light dimmed enough for me to notice, then steadied again. I walked closer to her and followed her line of sight. Of course, there was nothing there. Just the same off-white ceiling we'd repainted last spring. But the buzzing stayed, thin and persistent, like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then it stopped. Luna relaxed slowly, but didn't lie back down. She just kept staring for another minute before finally lowering her head. I checked my phone without thinking. No notifications, no signal issues. The clock read 10:47 p.m. A cold spot lingered in the room that hadn't been there before. I decided to step outside again, mostly because staying in that quiet didn't feel right. The porch creaked under my weight as I reopened the door. The air smelled faintly metallic, like after a lightning storm, even though the sky was clear. Down the street, near the cul-de-sac, a faint pale glow pulsed once between two parked cars. It wasn't bright enough to light anything up around it. It just existed, hovering low, maybe 3 or 4 feet above the asphalt. Then it slid sideways and sank out of sight like it had dropped through the road. I walked a few steps forward, heart beating a little too hard, scanning the area. No voices, no engines, no movement except the slow sway of a hanging wind chime on my neighbor's porch. A soft vibration rolled through the ground again, lighter than the first but impossible to ignore. My phone buzzed in my hand, but when I looked, the screen was black and unresponsive for a moment before lighting up again. 10:47 p.m. The same time as before. That made me pause. I knew I'd been outside at least 5 or 6 minutes by then. I rubbed my face with my palm and tried not to let my mind spiral. Another pinpoint light streaked across the sky, not as fast as the first one. This one moved slower, controlled, like it was tracing a path rather than bursting through it. As it disappeared, the faint hum returned. My porch light flickered again. I stepped back toward the door instinctively, every sense on edge, the air feeling tight around me. The hum grew a little stronger, enough to make my teeth feel like they were barely tingling. Luna barked once from inside, sharp and nervous. Then everything dropped into silence. No bug sounds, no distant traffic, no wind. It felt like the entire neighborhood had been muted. I stood frozen, listening to my own breathing, waiting for something else to happen. The silence pressed in so thick it almost hurt. After what felt like a long minute, normal sound bled back in slowly. Crickets, leaves rustling, the faint buzz of a streetlight. The porch stopped vibrating. The air cooled slightly like a breath had passed through it. Theo arrived not long after, headlights washing over the front of the house as he pulled in. He stepped out of the car and gave me a confused look when he saw me still standing on the porch. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, though it came out too fast. "Just weird night." He noticed Luna clinging close to my legs when we went inside, her body tense in a way I'd never seen before. I didn't bother trying to explain the lights or the humming. I didn't know how to make it sound real. We went to bed later than usual. I lay there staring at the ceiling, half expecting another vibration to roll through the house. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to that faint buzzing again. It wasn't loud enough to fully shake me awake, just enough to make me aware of it. The room felt warmer than it should have, even with the fan running low. A thin glow leaked through the edges of the curtain, pale and cool. I sat up slowly and peeked through the window. The street below was empty, but a soft white point hovered above the asphalt near the end of the driveway. It wasn't moving. It wasn't illuminating anything around it. It just existed, steady and quiet. I watched it, not blinking, afraid that looking away would make it come closer somehow. After several seconds, it drifted upward, straight into the night, until it disappeared between the stars. The hum faded with it. The digital alarm clock beside the bed read 12:03 a.m. I blinked and realized only a couple minutes had passed since I'd checked it the last time before dozing off. Theo slept through all of it. By morning, everything looked normal again. No marks in the street, no damage to the porch, no loose railing. Luna finally relaxed, though she kept sniffing the front doorway area longer than usual. I went through the day on autopilot, answering emails, doing house chores, trying not to think about how the air had felt when the light had hovered outside. But every time the house went too quiet, every time the porch creaked at night, I found myself listening for that low vibration again, just faint enough to almost feel imagined. I first saw the glow just past midnight, cutting along Willow Terrace on my way back from my friend Mason's place. The fog was thick enough that the streetlights looked like dull orange smudges instead of actual lights. I had my hands shoved in my jacket pockets and my head down because the air felt colder than it should have for September. The kind of cold that sinks into your sleeves. I didn't notice anything weird until the glow slid across the fog above me. It wasn't bright, more like someone holding a red flashlight behind a bedsheet. Soft, diffused too, even to be headlights or a passing taillight reflection. It hovered maybe 30 feet up, right over the middle of the street. I stopped because it didn't move like anything I could explain. The shape wasn't clear through the fog, but the glow had a roundness to it, a smooth edge. It wasn't spreading or flickering, just sitting there. At first I thought it was some kind of weird drone, maybe a hobbyist messing around late, but drones buzz. Even the quiet ones make that insect hum. This thing didn't make a sound, and it didn't blink or dim like a battery was dying. It just stayed. I stood under a street lamp and stared up into the fog. The red glow pulsed once, very gently, like it was taking a slow breath. I actually stepped back. I didn't want to, but my legs did it for me. After that small pulse, the glow drifted a few feet sideways. Not fast, more like it was sliding across ice. It kept the same height, the same shape. The fog didn't break around it, didn't swirl or get disturbed like it should have if something solid was passing through it. That part bothered me more than the glow itself. I kept walking, trying to act normal, even though I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. As I moved, the glow shifted too, keeping ahead of me by maybe 20 yards. That's when I started thinking I was imagining it. The fog was playing tricks on me. Lights were reflecting from traffic somewhere behind me, except there weren't any cars. The whole street was empty. Even the houses looked dark, like everyone had gone to bed hours ago. I walked another block, and glow stayed with me, always ahead, always at the same distance. At one point, it dipped slightly, and I swear I felt the temperature drop another few degrees. I didn't know if I should turn back or cut through someone's yard to get out of the open, but moving felt safer than standing still. The fog made the neighborhood feel smaller, quieter. Sounds got swallowed up. Even my own footsteps felt muted. About halfway down the next block, I noticed something else. All the porch lights were off. Every single one. Usually at least a few houses leave them on, especially the corner units. But tonight, every bulb looked dead. I know that doesn't prove anything, but it fed into the paranoia. It felt like the whole street was emptied out, so I'd be the only one to see the glow. The red shape drifted a little higher, maybe 5 or 6 feet. Then it paused again. I don't know why, but that pause was somehow worse than when it moved. It felt like waiting, like it was deciding something. I told myself, out loud, quietly, it's nothing, just fog doing weird fog stuff. Saying it didn't help at all. I crossed onto Maplewood Lane. My house was 3 more blocks up near the bend. I speed walked without trying to look like I was panicking. The glow kept pace, higher now, but still visible through the low fog. Then something happened that made my skin crawl. The fog thinned for maybe half a second, just enough for me to see that the glow wasn't reflecting off anything. It was something. A round shape, faint with a smooth outline that didn't match anything familiar, just hovering without any visible structure holding it up. And when the fog closed back in, the glow looked brighter, like the shape had moved slightly closer again. I didn't stop walking, but every muscle in my body tensed. I kept glancing behind me, thinking maybe this thing was just a weird projection from a car or house light, but nothing was behind me except thick fog and a row of dark houses. I reached the small park near my street, the one with the wooden bench and sad-looking chain-link fence. The glow paused again at the corner, much higher now, like it was rising with the slope of the hill. For a moment, everything got unnaturally still. The fog didn't move, the trees didn't sway, even the hum from the power lines overhead seemed muted. That's when I heard it. Not a noise exactly, more like a vibration in the air. A faint thrum that I felt in my chest more than in my ears. It wasn't steady. It fluttered like something struggling to start up. It made my ribs feel tight. The glow flickered slightly, not like a normal light, but like it blurred around the edges. I whispered, "What are you?" Then the glow rose straight up, fast but not instantly. It ascended through the fog like it was being pulled by a cable. The fog around it brightened as it passed through, just then dimmed again once it was higher. A few seconds later, it stopped rising and hovered just below the low cloud ceiling. The thrum faded. My chest felt lighter again. I thought maybe that was it. Maybe it would vanish, and I could convince myself it was some trick of the weather. But then it moved sideways again, sliding above the street in a straight, deliberate line. Not drifting, not bobbing like a balloon, just gliding with purpose. It reached the edge of the park, hesitated, and then shot upward into the cloud bank. The fog lit up faint red for a moment, like a watercolor stain blooming across paper. Then everything went back to normal. The dim streetlights, the damp fog, the quiet. I stood there breathing hard, trying to hear anything that might tell me where it went. A breeze, a drone motor, an engine, anything. There was nothing. I didn't run home, but I walked fast enough that my shoes scraped louder against the sidewalk than they had all night. When I reached my house, I fumbled the keys, trying to unlock the door. My hands shook more than I realized. Inside, everything looked normal. My living room lamp was still on. My dog, Ellie, lifted her head from the couch, but didn't bark like she usually does when I come in late. She just stared at me, ears up, like she sensed something had followed me home. I pulled the curtains shut, even though I usually don't bother. I didn't want to look outside again. Later, when I tried to fall asleep, I kept replaying the moment when the fog thinned and I saw the outline, smooth, round, too even to be anything mechanical I recognized. But the part that sticks with me the most is the feeling right before it ascended into the clouds. That heavy stillness, like the air was waiting for something else to happen. It didn't. Everything stayed quiet. But walking through that same stretch of street now, even on clear nights, I catch myself checking the sky for that soft red glow, half hoping it won't be there, half expecting it to appear again just ahead of me, keeping the same careful distance. I woke up because the whole house was vibrating lightly, the way it does when a semi passes too close on the highway, except it was softer and constant, like a low tremor running through the floorboards. The headboard rattled faintly against the wall. My bedside lamp gave a tiny clink sound every few seconds. I lay there for a moment trying to figure out if I was still dreaming, but the vibration kept going. I sat up and checked the clock. It said 2:46 a.m. The air in the room felt warmer than it should have, even though the windows were cracked open. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up. The vibration stayed steady, not getting worse, not fading. I walked to the hallway and glanced toward the front door. The house creaked in small ways like usual, but something about the quiet felt wrong. No distant cars, no wind against the siding, just that low hum through the floor. I moved to the living room window and pulled the curtain aside. The street outside was empty. No headlights, no passing truck, no flashing lights, nothing. The pavement looked slightly damp under the street lamp, but there had been no recent rain. I smelled something faint in the air, sharp and strange, almost like hot metal or old coins. It didn't belong to anything familiar. Not gas, not plastic, something colder. I opened the window a bit more, and the vibration rolled through my hands where they touched the frame. The night was still. No breeze, no engine sound, just silence wrapped around that low, shuddering pulse. My neighbor's house across the street sat dark and quiet. The miller's old oak tree wasn't moving at all. Even the wind chimes on Mrs. Hernandez's porch were completely motionless. The vibration suddenly shifted slightly, like it deepened for a second, then returned to the same rhythm. My stomach tightened. I stepped back from the window and grabbed my phone. No notifications, no weather alerts, no power outage. Everything looked normal. I walked down the short hallway toward the kitchen and noticed the silverware in the drying rack was faintly buzzing, like it was responding to the same tremor. The glass cups trembled just enough to make a soft clicking noise. "Hello?" I muttered, knowing no one would answer. The house felt occupied, even though I was alone. I put my hand flat against the wall and felt the hum traveling through it, faint but unmistakable. The smell lingered, that metallic edge, like the air had been charged. I moved toward the front door and placed my hand on the knob. It felt slightly warm, which didn't make sense either. I hesitated, then opened it slowly. The porch light flicked on automatically and washed pale yellow over the front steps. Outside, the night was empty. No movement. No sound. Just the same vibration humming under everything. I stepped onto the porch. The wooden boards felt alive under my bare feet, buzzing lightly. The air carried that electric metal smell stronger now. I scanned the road from left to right. Still nothing. Then I noticed the sky looked off. Not dark exactly, but tinted, like a dull sheen had been brushed across it. The stars were faded, not gone, just muted under a thin, grayish cast. It didn't look like clouds. It looked heavy. The vibration gently increased again, just a hair stronger, and the porch railing shivered in my hands. I whispered my sister's name out of habit, Mel. No response came, which made sense. She didn't live here. The quiet felt deeper suddenly, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. Behind me, inside the house, I heard the soft creak of a floorboard, even though no one else was there. I turned slowly. The hallway looked the same as always, the open bedroom door, the dim outline of the couch, the shadow of the ceiling fan. Nothing visibly wrong. I stepped back inside and shut the door. The vibration continued through the floor as my feet crossed the threshold. My phone buzzed suddenly, not a message, just a brief flicker, then the screen went dark. When I tapped it awake again, the time read 3:09 a.m. That made no sense. It had been 2:46 not that long ago. I stood there staring at the screen, then glanced back toward the door. The hum deepened again, and for a second it felt like it rose through my chest, pressing gently against my ribs. Then, just as suddenly as it started, everything went still. No vibration, no hum, nothing. The house settled with a tiny crack of wood relaxing. The air felt normal again. The metallic smell softened and faded like it had never been there. I waited, listening. My ears strained for any sign it might come back, but the night gave me nothing. Just normal silence, soft and ordinary. I walked back to the window and looked out at the road again. Still empty, still calm. When I turned away, I noticed my kitchen clock blinking 12, even though the power hadn't gone out. I reset it slowly, hands shaking a bit more than I liked. I went back to my bedroom but didn't crawl under the covers right away. I stood by the doorway, watching the faint outline of the ceiling move with my breathing. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. Eventually, I sat on the edge of the bed and checked my phone again. 3:12 a.m. No missed calls, no alerts, no evidence anything strange had occurred. But the house still felt unsettled, like a quiet after an argument no one finished. I lay down and tried to slow my breathing. Sleep didn't come easily. Every small creak made my eyes snap open. Every tiny sound made me tense up. At some point, my body gave in and drifted off. When morning light filtered in through the blinds, everything looked normal. No vibration, no smell, just my familiar little house and the quiet street beyond it. Still, when I walked out to get the mail, I noticed faint marks in the dew on the driveway that didn't resemble footprints or tire tracks. just shallow circular impressions spaced strangely far apart, like something had hovered low and paused for a moment. They had already started to fade by the time I stared at them long enough to notice. My headlights caught it just past mile marker 184, right where the road straightened out and the tree line dipped low on both sides. It looked like heat rising off pavement, except it hovered about a foot above the asphalt and stretched the width of my lane. A soft shimmer, almost glossy, like light bending wrong. I let off the gas without really thinking. The highway was empty. Nothing behind me, nothing ahead. Just dark field, low hills, and the faint line of the road vanishing into the distance. My name's Brett Hollander, and I'd been driving back from a late shift at a packaging plant in northern Wyoming. It was just after midnight, dry air, cool but not cold, the kind of quiet that made your ears ring if you paid attention too long. The distortion didn't fade when the car rolled closer. It stayed right there, pulsing almost gently, like it had its own rhythm. I remember thinking it looked like a mirage, but it didn't make sense for one to be that close and that defined. It wasn't fog either. It didn't move with the breeze. It just hung there, waiting. I eased forward anyway. I didn't know why. I think some part of me expected it to vanish before I hit it. It didn't. The front of the car passed through and the air turned strange for a second. Not hot, not cold, just wrong. My skin felt heavy, like the pressure shifted slightly. There was a soft hum, low and steady, not coming from the engine or the road. Then I was through it. Everything looked normal again. The dashboard clock caught my eye immediately. It read 12:47 a.m. I knew it had just said 12:39, maybe 30 seconds earlier. I stared at it, then glanced at my phone on the seat. Same time, 8 minutes gone. I looked back at the road, heart knocking a little faster now. The shimmer was gone. Everything behind me looked normal too. Empty. Dark. Still. Okay, I muttered, even though no one was there. That's not right. I kept driving, gripping the steering wheel harder than I realized. A mile passed, then another. The road started curving toward a low stretch of forest. That's when the radio flickered. No warning. Just static, sharp and hollow. Then it settled into something like a low drone. Not music, not words. Just a tone that wavered slightly, rising and falling like breath. I turned the volume knob down. It didn't change. The sound stayed at the same level. I hit the power button. The screen went dark. The tone continued. My throat went dry. I tapped the dashboard like the system just needed a reset. Still there. Outside, the rest of the world seemed to dim slightly, like the road ahead wasn't as clear as it should have been. My headlights worked fine, but everything beyond their reach felt muted, flat, like it wasn't fully there. The hum lasted maybe 20 seconds. Then it cut out all at once, snapping back into normal silence so abruptly it made my ears feel wrong. The radio powered back on by itself, tuned to the same country station I'd been listening to all night. The song picked up mid-chorus, like nothing had happened. I checked the clock again. 12:52. Another 5 minutes. Gone. I started talking out loud, more to keep myself grounded than anything else. You're tired, man. That's all. Long shift. Weird patch of road. Just keep going. I rolled down the window a little, letting cool air hit my face. It smelled faintly metallic, like old pennies, but it faded after a few seconds and went back to normal dry night smell. The highway dipped lower for a stretch. My headlights skimmed over cracked pavement and faded paint lines. I scanned every inch of the road ahead. That's when something caught my side mirror. A faint, pale glow. Not headlights. Too soft. It didn't move the way another car's lights would. It just lingered, a steady off-white dot. I checked the rearview mirror. Nothing. Back to the side mirror. Still there. I slowed slightly, watching it. It kept pace, but didn't grow brighter, didn't fall back. Just hovered at the same relative distance, like it knew where I was. My stomach tightened. I sped up. 80. Still there. Slowed back to 60. Still there. Then, without warning, the glow stretched slightly and faded, dissolving into nothing like breath on glass. The rest of the drive home dragged. I jumped at every dip in the road, every shadow pushing in from the shoulder. I checked the clock constantly. It behaved normally for the rest of the trip, but I couldn't shake the feeling that time was moving wrong around me. When I finally turned onto my gravel drive, I exhaled in frustration and relief. The house lights were off as usual. Quiet, dark, safe. I stepped out of the car and the night felt normal again. Cool. Still. Insects chirping somewhere in the grass. But even standing there, keys still in my hand, I kept thinking about the shimmer. How solid it looked. How deliberate. Inside, I locked the door and flipped on the living room lamp. The ordinary glow made everything feel steadier. I dropped my keys on the table and glanced at the microwave clock. 12:59 a.m. I'd left work just after 12:20. It didn't add up. I sat on the couch for a minute, listening to the quiet hum of the fridge and the ticking wall clock. I kept expecting something else to happen. Another sound, another flicker. Nothing did. Eventually I went to bed, but sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that ripple hanging in the road like it had been waiting for me. The next morning on the way back to town, the stretch of highway looked completely ordinary. No shimmer, no distortion, just cracked pavement and faded lines like always. But when I reached mile marker 184, I found myself slowing down without meaning to, staring at the exact spot where I'd driven through whatever it was. The road stayed empty, and for just a second, the air there looked almost thinner. The pale silver light filled the bedroom so evenly that I thought morning had come early, even though my phone on the nightstand said 2:17 a.m. I blinked a few times, trying to focus, and sat up on instinct. The second I moved, the light vanished. The room snapped back to darkness, thick and quiet, and my eyes scrambled to adjust. My name's Eli Navarro, and I'd been living alone in a narrow split-level place on the edge of Galewood for about 6 months. It wasn't a bad neighborhood. Quiet streets, old maples, a few porch lights always left on. That night had been cold, the kind where frost crept up the edges of the windows, but nothing like snow or fog. I sat there for a minute, listening. No cars outside, no footsteps upstairs, just the faint hum of the heater starting and stopping. My heart was already faster than it should have been, but I told myself it was just a weird dream I'd half woken from. Still, the light had felt too real. I lay back down, pulled the blanket up, and tried to close my eyes again. It couldn't have been more than 2 minutes before a soft metallic scent drifted in, sharp and clean, like cold air mixing with pennies. I frowned and sat up again, sniffing the air like an idiot. The smell lingered, faint but definite. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and padded to the window. The blinds were still closed, but a thin glow seeped through the corners like something hovered just beyond them. It wasn't streetlight yellow or neighbor's porch light warm. It was silvery and cool, almost colorless. When I pulled the blinds open a few inches, the glow disappeared again, replaced by a normal dark yard and the faint outline of the back fence. No car, no flashlight, no motion. I stood there, staring into the black yard, trying to make sense of it. The air outside looked completely still. Even the branches that usually swayed a little in the breeze weren't moving. A slight tapping sound came from the siding near the kitchen window. Not rhythmic, just a gentle, slow click, like someone brushing a fingernail against metal. I moved closer to the glass, squinting out. Nothing. Then the tapping stopped. I stepped back and rubbed my face, suddenly aware of how quiet everything felt. The kind of quiet that feels heavy, like sound had been turned down rather than fading naturally. I checked my phone again. 2:23 a.m., no notifications, no missed calls, but my sleep tracking app showed something odd. A spike of activity right around 2:15, like I'd been restless or moving before waking. I hadn't felt that part at all. I went to the kitchen for a glass of water, trying to shake the weird edge crawling under my skin. The faint metallic smell followed me. When I turned on the tap, it sputtered once and then ran normally. For some reason, the noise felt too loud for the space. As I leaned against the counter, the silver light returned. It bled through the small window above the sink, brightening the tiles in a cold, smooth wash. This time, I didn't move, just watched it spread like fog made of light. It didn't flicker. It didn't shift. It was steady. My pulse hammered slowly instead of racing, like my body hadn't yet caught up to what my brain knew was wrong. I whispered, "Hello?" to an empty apartment, not expecting an answer, but needing to break the silence. Above the cabinets, the light seemed to intensify for just a second, and then, again, it disappeared. The room dropped back into dim shadows, leaving me standing there with the echo of that word still hanging in the air. Outside, a low humming drifted through the walls, barely audible. It felt more like pressure than sound. The floorboards vibrated faintly under my bare feet. I stepped closer to the back door and rested my hand on the handle, more out of instinct than bravery. The knob felt colder than usual. I could still smell that metallic note in the air. I didn't open the door. I just stood there, listening, breathing shallow, as the vibration faded and the hum thinned out until it was gone. The stillness after that felt unreal. I checked the time again. 2:41 a.m. Somehow almost 20 minutes had passed, but it hadn't felt that long. Not even close. My shoulders ached faintly, the way they did after sleeping wrong or tensing too long. I glanced around the kitchen and noticed something I hadn't seen before. On the wall near the doorframe, a faint circular mark, lighter than the paint around it, like something had pressed warm against it briefly. It wasn't damp, it wasn't scorched, just slightly discolored and warmer than the surrounding wall when I touched it. My skin prickled. I grabbed my robe and my phone and walked through the living room toward the front window. If something had been outside, I wanted to see at least a trace of it. The street looked normal, empty. A single porch light, 2 houses down, cast a weak pool of yellow on the sidewalk. Everything else was dark. As I stood there, trying to convince myself I was overreacting, the distant hum returned once more, softer, like it was moving away. It slid through the air for maybe 5 seconds, then cut off sharply. Silence again. I didn't sleep after that. I sat on my couch until first light, wrapped in the robe, scrolling aimlessly and glancing at the windows every few minutes. Nothing else happened. No lights, no sounds, no movement outside. By morning, it almost felt like I'd imagined the whole thing, except the faint circle on the kitchen wall was still there. And the air, even in daylight, carried the barest hint of that metallic smell beside the back door. I went about my day, took a shower, made coffee, tried to act normal. But every time a shadow shifted on the counter or light reflected oddly off the floor, my eyes snapped up automatically. That night, I left a lamp on by the bed. I didn't want to wake up to silver light again without some anchor that felt solid and real. When I finally did fall asleep, it was restless and shallow. And just before drifting off completely, I could have sworn I felt that same heavy pressure in the air, like something had returned to study the quiet from a distance. I noticed the light about 20 minutes after leaving Claremont. It was around 11:30 p.m., late enough that the highway between towns was almost empty. I'd just finished a long shift at the warehouse and I was driving back to my place in Rockwell, which was still a good 2 hours out. The sky was clear, moonless, and sharp enough that I could see every star above the fields. At first, I didn't think anything of the light. It looked like a bright headlight from a distant car, way behind me, barely more than a speck in the rearview mirror. Nothing moved out there except the occasional semi, so seeing one tiny point of light wasn't weird. But after 10 minutes, it was still there. Same distance, same brightness, not fading, not getting closer. I remember glancing at the mirror more than I should have, the way you do when you think someone might be behind you. It wasn't tailgating or anything. If anything, it felt impossibly far back, but it stayed pinned in the exact same spot in the mirror, like it was locked there. I tried to ignore it. I turned up the radio a little, some late-night talk station where the host's voice blended into the engine noise. The road curved long, sweeping bends through flat farmland. Usually, any car behind you shifts in the mirror when the road turns. The angle changes, the lights slide around. This one didn't. It stayed perfectly centered. I kept checking, telling myself it had to be a coincidence. Maybe the car behind me was taking the curves at the same speed, same angle, just happening to stay aligned with my mirror. Still, the longer it lasted, the stranger it felt. It wasn't bright enough to be high beams, more like a single focused point, not white exactly, but a pale, cold blue. Around midnight, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. It startled me because I wasn't expecting anything. When I reached for it, the screen was dark, no new notifications. The buzz had been like a phantom vibration, but too strong to be in my head. I set it back down and checked the mirror again. Same light, same place. The next town, Marston, was still 20 minutes off. Just open highway and dead fields stretching out in every direction. I was starting to feel tense without really knowing why. My hands kept tightening around the wheel, relaxing, tightening again. After maybe another 15 minutes, I slowed down. Not by much, just enough to test something. If it was a car, the distance between us should have changed a little. The light didn't move. My chest felt tight. I pressed the gas a little harder, up to 5 miles over the limit. The car hummed, engine pushing steady, and I waited for the light to shift. Still nothing. I didn't speed up more. Something about the whole thing made me afraid of drawing attention to myself. Like if I made too much of a move, whatever it was might react. A mile marker went by on my right. I don't remember the number. I only remember the sense of being farther from anything than I'd ever felt. No houses, no farm lights, no cars coming the other way, just darkness and that point of blue hovering behind me. At some point I realized the radio had gone silent. Not static, silent. The screen still showed the station info, but no sound came out. I tapped the volume knob. Nothing. I turned the whole unit off and back on. Dead quiet. That was when I decided to pull over. I didn't slam on the brakes or anything dramatic. I eased off the gas, letting the car slow on its own, and steered onto the shoulder. Gravel crunched under the tires. The whole car shuddered a little as it came to a stop. The light in the mirror didn't change. I kept my hands on the wheel for a few seconds before reaching down and shutting off the engine. The headlights stayed on for a moment until I switched them off too. Suddenly, the world outside felt huge and empty. The darkness swallowed my car like it wasn't supposed to be there at all. I leaned closer to the rearview mirror, expecting the light to do something now that I'd stopped. For a moment, it didn't. Then it rose, not floating forward, not drifting sideways. It rose straight up, smooth as if it were being pulled by a string only it could see. Up, up, up. Tiny movements at first, then faster, until it was nearly vertical above where it had been on the road. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The light paused high in the sky, just one beat, and then it blinked out. Gone. Not dimmed, not flew away. Gone. The sky looked normal again. Too normal. Every star in its place, cold and perfect. I sat there longer than I want to admit, maybe 10 minutes, could have been more. I kept waiting for something else to happen. Another light, a sound, the radio turning on by itself, anything. Nothing did. Eventually, I turned the car back on. The engine started fine, but the radio screen was frozen. I held the power button until it rebooted. When it came back, the time was wrong by 8 minutes. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't been stopped that long. The rest of the drive felt like I was underwater, like every sound was muffled just a little too much. No cars passed me. No lights came up behind me or ahead of me. When I rolled into Rockwell, the streetlights looked dimmer than usual. My apartment felt too quiet when I walked inside. I plugged my phone in, and for a second the screen didn't respond. Then it lit up all at once, every notification from the past hour hitting simultaneously. Nothing about that night made sense. But the part that stays with me, the part that still creeps into my mind when I'm driving alone at night, is how that single point of light followed me with absolute precision for so long. Not chasing, not drifting, just watching, keeping pace, like it was waiting for me to stop. I was sitting at the bus stop out on Old Quarry Road, the one with the crooked metal bench and the faded route sign that always looked like it was about to fall off. It was around 6:40 in the evening, late enough that the sky had gone that weird purple-blue color you only see in the countryside. I was heading back from my after-school job at the feed store, waiting for the last bus home before my mom started texting me nonstop. It was cold. Not freezing, but the kind of cold that made me tuck my hands into my sleeves. The road was empty in both directions, just fields on one side and woods on the other. No houses close by, no streetlights, just the one dim bulb inside the little shelter, flickering when the wind hit it. I didn't see the kids arrive. One second I was alone. The next there were two of them standing a few feet away. A boy and a girl, both young, maybe 10 or 11. Both pale in a way that looked wrong for kids who should have been running around or playing outside. Their clothes were plain. Dark jackets, dark pants, nothing bright or patterned. They weren't even breathing hard, like they hadn't walked there. They were just suddenly present. I sat up a little straighter. Hey, I said, trying not to sound weird. You guys waiting for the bus too? The girl stepped closer. Her movements were slow, like she wasn't used to having to move her body. "Does this bus go toward the light?" she asked. Her voice wasn't nervous, but it wasn't curious either. It was flat, like she was asking out of obligation. "The light?" I repeated. "What light?" The boy looked up at the sky. His eyes stayed trained on it, unblinking. "The one that follows the road." I followed his gaze, but all I saw were low clouds, thick and gray, glowing faintly with leftover daylight. "You mean like headlights?" I tried, feeling my chest tighten a little for reasons I couldn't explain. "No," the girl said. "The other light." I didn't know what to say to that. The air around us felt heavier than before, like it had gained weight. Even the usual evening breeze had stopped. Everything was too still. "Are you too lost?" I asked. "Do your parents know where you are?" They didn't react. The bench creaked slightly as I shifted. The girl took another step closer, and when the bus shelter light flickered above us, I saw her eyes clearly for the first time. Black, not dark brown, black, fully. No whites, no reflections, just two flat voids staring in my direction, though not exactly at me, more like past me. My heart thumped so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stood up without meaning to. "Listen, I don't think this is the right bus stop for." The pavement hummed. It started faint, like a vibration running through the soles of my shoes. I thought at first it was a truck coming from down the road, but there was no engine noise, no lights, nothing moving. The hum grew stronger. The metal bench rattled against the concrete slab. The loose sign above us buzzed like it was going to shake free. The air felt charged, like static before a storm, but there was no wind. Not even a stray leaf moved. The boy's head tilted slightly upward. "It's arriving," he said. A deep pressure pulsed upward from the ground, not painful, but overwhelming, like standing too close to an enormous speaker playing a sound below human hearing. Then the sky brightened. A soft glow formed behind the clouds. It wasn't moonlight. The moon wasn't out. It wasn't lightning either. It was steady, growing, spreading across the cloud cover like a giant lamp was being lowered above the whole road. The girl looked up, her face calm. "It sees us." I stumbled backward, staring at the clouds. The glow intensified, turning the entire sky above us into a pale, artificial-looking sheet of white. The brightness didn't bleed to the horizon. It was concentrated right over the bus stop, right over the road. My breath came out in quick bursts. I squinted against the glare, feeling the hum travel up my legs and into my chest. Then the light blinked out. Not dimmed, not faded. Blink. Gone. Instant silence replaced the humming. The air relaxed. The bench stopped vibrating. The night returned like someone flipped a switch. I blinked hard, trying to get my eyes to adjust. Spots floated across my vision. My pulse pounded so loudly it was all I could hear. When my sight cleared, I turned to the kids. They weren't there. Not walking away. Not hiding behind the shelter. Not anywhere. Just gone. The space beside the bench was empty. The patch of dirt in front of the shelter was undisturbed. There was no sound in the fields or the woods. Nothing. I walked out into the road, turning in a full circle, half expecting them to reappear. The darkness felt different, emptier, like something had just moved through and left everything hollow behind it. My bus didn't come for another 8 minutes. I spent the whole time standing in the middle of the road, staring at the sky, waiting for another flash I hoped wouldn't happen. When the bus finally arrived, the driver looked at me funny. "You all right? Looks like you've seen a ghost." I mumbled something about the lights flickering and took a seat. The bus shook normally when it hit bumps, but every vibration made me jump. At home, I told my mom the bus was just late. I didn't mention the kids, or the humming, or the light. But the next morning, when I walked past that bus stop on my way to school, I noticed something odd. The metal bench had shifted 3 inches to the left. I could see the clean outline in the dirt where it used to be. No one had been out there during the night. No trucks, no workers, and the bench was too heavy to push easily. It bolted into the slab. I still wait for the bus there sometimes, but I don't sit on the bench anymore. And every time the sky looks cloudy, I keep my eyes down. It happened late in August, on one of those warm nights where the air feels heavy even after the sun goes down. I'd been sitting on my porch in Bellamont, this tiny town outside Flagstaff, just letting the day drain out of me. I had a folding chair leaned back against the railing, a glass of water sweating on the table beside me, and not much on my mind. The cicadas were still going, though they slowed whenever the breeze picked up. I wasn't doing anything special, just sitting there like I always did before bed. I looked up for no particular reason. I do that sometimes, just stare at the sky, checking which stars are out. The porch faces south, so I get a pretty clear view once the neighborhood lights settle down. There's one star I always notice because it hangs almost directly above the pine behind my mailbox. I don't know the constellation names. I just know that star is usually the brightest one. That night, it got brighter. Not gradually, like when a plane passes and catches sunlight. More like someone turned a dimmer switch up on it fast. 1 second it was this normal white pinprick, and the next it was glaring, not blinding, but way too bright for a star, like it had swollen. I sat forward in the chair without thinking. My first reaction was that maybe it was a flare, but it wasn't moving. It hung in the exact same spot, and the light didn't flicker. It just sat there, burning in that steady, almost clinical way. Then it shrank, not faded, shrank. The brightness pulled inward, collapsing into itself until it was back to the tiny point it had been before. Maybe 2 seconds, maybe 3. The sky around it didn't change. Nothing else brightened or dimmed. It was like only that one point of light had been touched. My porch light went out a moment later. It didn't flicker. It didn't buzz. It just snapped off like the switch had been flipped from inside the house. The rest of the street kept its glow. I could still see the street lamp by the Reynolds place down the road, but my porch was suddenly in total shadow. I stood up, instinctively reaching toward the bulb to steady myself, even though I knew I couldn't reach it from where I was. When I glanced back up at the sky, the star looked normal, too normal. I kept staring at it, waiting for it to do something again. It didn't. I went inside to grab a spare bulb because I was sure it had just blown. But when I came back out and twisted the cover off, the bulb was cool to the touch, not warm like it should have been. I'd had the light on for at least an hour. I replaced it anyway. Still nothing. I flipped the porch switch inside the house twice, 3 times. No response. I checked the breaker box in the laundry room. All switches were lined up fine. Nothing had tripped. Everything inside the house still worked. The fridge hummed, the AC, the overhead lights. Just the porch light was dead. I stood inside the doorway, staring at the sky again. I couldn't shake the feeling that the timing hadn't been coincidence. The star brightened, collapsed, and the very next moment my porch light died. My heart was beating faster than it should have for something so small. I went back to my chair and sat down, even though the dark around me felt heavier now. The cicadas had stopped entirely. Usually they taper off when a breeze comes through, but the air had gone still. The quiet pressed into my ears like I'd stepped into a basement. I told myself I was just noticing the silence because of the weird light thing, but the longer I sat, the stranger it felt. Across the road, the Lehman's dog Jasper gave one low bark. Just one. And then nothing more. He usually goes on forever if something sets him off. I listened for a while, hoping he'd bark again, but the neighborhood stayed unnaturally calm. I tilted back and stared at the star again. It looked exactly like it always did. If somebody had come outside right then, they wouldn't have noticed anything unusual. I tried looking away and then looking back quickly to see if maybe my eyes had tricked me earlier, but it stayed still and ordinary. A few minutes later, maybe 5 or 6, I heard a soft click from the porch. My first thought was that the bulb had finally warmed up enough to turn on again. I leaned forward, watching the fixture. It didn't light up, but something inside it moved. A tiny twitch, like a mechanical part resetting. I waited for a hum, a spark, anything. Nothing came, but that click wasn't the only sound. There was another one behind it, farther away, from the woods beyond my backyard. A dull, short tap, like 2 pieces of wood knocking together. I looked back there even though the trees were too thick and too dark to see anything. The sound didn't repeat. I checked the bulb again. It was still stone cold. The whole situation made my skin tight. I didn't want to go back inside, but I didn't want to stay out either. I kept trying to convince myself I was making connections where there weren't any. A star brightening weirdly couldn't blow out a porch light. Things don't work like that. Except the timing. The timing wouldn't leave me alone. I took out my phone to use the flashlight function and aimed it at the fixture. The light from the screen flickered once, which it never does, but the phone didn't shut off. I slid my thumb across the screen again, and the flashlight stayed steady. I inspected the wiring, but it looked intact. No scorch marks, no loose pieces. I turned to go inside again and stopped halfway. The sky wasn't completely dark anymore. It took me a moment to understand what I was seeing. Not light exactly, but more of a faint, elevated haze over the tree line. Almost like far-off headlights reflecting on low clouds, except there were no clouds. The sky had cleared earlier, and the stars were sharp. The haze pulsed once. It didn't brighten so much as thicken, like a breath being held. It lasted a second, and then went back to normal darkness. I felt something in the air when it happened. A small pressure shift, like stepping into an elevator when it first starts to rise. The cicadas started again suddenly, all at once, loud enough to feel like a wave washing back over the neighborhood. The sky went back to looking the way it always did. The haze disappeared. The pressure eased. I sat back down and forced myself to stay still for another 10 minutes, watching and listening for anything else. The porch light stayed dead. The star above the pine didn't move or pulse or shift again. The woods behind my house stayed quiet, except for the usual late summer insects. Eventually, I went inside, locked the door, and left the porch light switch on, hoping it would decide to come back on overnight. It didn't, did it? The next morning, the bulb worked. Not immediately. It flickered twice before finally holding steady. But it lit, just like nothing had happened. I tried to tell myself the star thing was just atmospheric weirdness, or a plane far away catching the sun at the right angle. I even convinced myself of that for a few hours. But that moment, when the sky thickened over the trees, when the porch light died without warming up, when the star seemed to grow and collapse like it was breathing, I keep replaying it. It never feels smaller with time. Every night since, when I sit on that porch, I look at the same star. It hasn't done anything like that again. Not yet. The light first showed up somewhere past midnight, about an hour after we'd left Elko heading east. There were maybe 9 of us on the bus, most asleep, and the driver, a guy named Carl, according to the little placard above his seat, hadn't said a word since we pulled out of the station. I'd taken the last row so I could stretch out, but the rattling ceiling vent above me wouldn't close all the way, so every few minutes a cold draft hit the top of my head. I remember looking out the window just to have something to focus on besides the hum of the engine. It was pitch black out there, nothing but long stretches of open desert broken up by old fence lines and the occasional cattle gate. And then I saw it. A single point of white light hovering way back in the distance. My first thought was another car cresting a hill, but it wasn't moving right. It stayed in the same spot in the glass like it was pacing us. I leaned closer, trying to figure out if it was some kind of reflection from inside the bus. But the overhead lights were off. The aisle lights were dim, yellow, uneven. Nothing inside could have made that kind of clean, sharp white. The bus bounced over a rough patch in the road, and the light stayed perfectly steady. I didn't think much of it for maybe a minute, just stared at it, watching for any kind of wobble or flicker, anything that would make it make sense. But it just stayed there, keeping the same distance no matter how fast or slow we were going. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I unbuckled, walked up a few rows, and tapped the shoulder of a woman who'd been awake the whole ride. Her name was Paula. She'd told me earlier she was heading to Omaha for a family thing. She looked annoyed at the interruption, but when I pointed out the window, she leaned across the empty seat next to her. "What are you trying to show me?" she whispered. "That light," I said. She squinted. At first, I thought she couldn't see it. Then she blinked a few times, frowning. That's not a car." "No," I said. She straightened up and looked toward the front of the bus, like she was going to say something to the driver, but then she hesitated and sat back down. I didn't blame her. It sounded dumb the second you tried to explain it. I went back to my seat, but I couldn't stop checking the window every few seconds. The light wasn't growing or shrinking, just following. Around 12:40, Carl's voice came over the intercom, startling everyone awake. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be making a brief stop up ahead. Everything's fine, just checking something on the bus. His voice had this forced calm to it. It didn't sound like a guy who just wanted to stretch his legs. People groaned, sat up, checked phones that barely had signal out there. The light didn't move. When Carl slowed down, the light slowed too. I watched it fall back a little as we dipped into a shallow valley, then rise again when the road climbed. Always the same distance, always the same brightness. We finally pulled onto a gravel turnout beside a cluster of scrub bushes. No lights nearby, not even a distant ranch, just darkness. Carl stood up, adjusting his cap, and nodded toward us. "Just give me a few minutes," he said. "Stay on board, please." He stepped off, letting the door hiss shut behind him. I moved up a couple rows for a better view. Paula joined me, standing in the aisle. A young guy in headphones, looked like his name should have been Evan, though I never asked, pulled his hood down and stared out too. The light hovered there, maybe a quarter-mile back now. Still. Too still. Carl walked to the front of the bus, doing this exaggerated inspection of the headlights, like he was giving us something to look at. But he kept glancing behind him toward the ridge on the right side of the road. Every few seconds, he'd lift his chin like he was trying to get a better view. "What the hell is that?" Paula whispered. None of us answered. Then it happened fast. The light jittered once, almost imperceptibly, and dropped behind the low hill beside the highway. Not drifted, not glided. Dropped, straight down. Like someone hit a switch, it vanished instantly. Carl froze where he was. I could see the tension in his shoulders even from inside the bus. He slowly walked to the door, stepped up, and closed it fast. He didn't sit right away. He scanned the windows, checking the darkness outside like he expected something else to appear. After a long 10 seconds, he finally sat down, gripped the wheel, and muttered something under his breath. Then the bus lurched forward harder than necessary, gravel spitting out from under the tires. No one talked for a while after that. I kept looking back out the window, expecting the light to reappear at any moment. Maybe from behind another rise or streaking across the sky. But the desert stayed dark, completely empty. The stars looked normal. The highway behind us was blank. About 20 minutes later, the bus lights flickered once. A quick pulse. Not enough to shut anything off, but enough for everyone to notice. Carl tapped the dashboard, muttered another curse, and kept driving. I didn't sleep the rest of the ride. Every time we passed a reflective road sign, I flinched, thinking the light had come back. Every wide open stretch of highway made me feel exposed, like there was too much sky above us. Even Paula, who'd seemed skeptical at first, kept her eyes fixed on the windows instead of trying to nap again. When we finally pulled into the Salt Lake City station around 3 a.m., Carl stood by the door as everyone got off. He wasn't smiling. He didn't make any small talk. When I stepped down, he touched my arm lightly. "You saw it too, right?" he said. I nodded. "What do you think it was?" He looked past me toward the empty darkness behind the station building, like he expected to see that same hovering point appear there. "I've been driving this route for 19 years, never seen anything move like that." "That's not an answer," I said quietly. He shook his head. "Because I don't have one." For a half second, I thought he was going to ask me not to talk about it, or maybe tell me something he'd heard from other drivers. But he didn't say anything else. Just stepped back onto the bus and shut the door. I watched him pull away, taillights fading into the night. I never saw that light again. Not on the ride home a week later, not on any night drives since. But sometimes when I catch headlights in my rearview mirror staying just a bit too steady, my stomach tightens. I wait to see if they'll rise or fall or blink, just to prove they're real. I was out on Cedar Hollow Lake before sunrise, the way I usually am whenever I can't sleep. The place is quiet in a way I don't get anywhere else. No traffic, no people yelling, just the soft slap of water against the hull. I've been fishing there since high school, and even now, in my 30s, I still go alone most mornings before work. That morning, though, everything felt off as soon as I cut the motor. The air was colder than it should have been for late July. Not normal cold lake air cold. This was a sharp, dry cold that made the hair on my arms stand up. The sky was still pitch dark except for a faint blue line on the horizon, not enough to see by, so I had my small lantern clipped to the side of my seat. I dropped anchor in my usual spot near the East Cove. The water was smooth, even calmer than usual. Too calm. No insects skimming the surface, no distant splash of a carp jumping. It was like the lake was holding its breath. I cast once, let the line settle, and sat back, trying to shake the weird feeling. I remember checking the time on my phone, 4:48 a.m., and then putting it away because the battery was lower than it should have been. I hadn't even used it that morning, but it was already at 30%. I figured maybe it hadn't charged right. A few minutes passed with nothing. No bites, no movement. The stillness was getting to me, so I turned the lantern down a little, hoping the dimmer light would let me see the first hints of dawn hitting the water. That's when I heard it. Not a sound, exactly. More like a shift, like the air pressure changed around me. My ears popped slightly, like I'd climbed too fast in an airplane. The lantern flickered once, just a quick dip in brightness. I grabbed the sides of the boat, thinking maybe I'd drifted and the anchor rope had snagged on something, but the boat wasn't moving. The water still looked completely flat. Then I saw the ripples. At first, it was so subtle I thought my eyes were messing with me. A gentle ring spreading out from the front of the boat. Not from a fish or anything breaking the surface. It was too smooth for that. It was like someone dropped a pebble perfectly straight down into the lake, inches from my bow. Except nothing had touched the water. The circle spread, widening, perfect in shape. Then another formed inside it, and another, slow, deliberate, evenly spaced. Each one originating from the exact same point, right in front of the boat. I leaned forward, squinting at the water. The lantern's light barely reached that far, but I could see just enough to make out a faint distortion under the surface. Not movement, just brightness. The kind of brightness you see when someone shines a flashlight through a thick layer of ice. Soft, blurred edges. The ripples kept forming, slower now, but stronger. The boat rocked gently, like something deep underneath was pushing water up in slow pulses. I thought about pulling the anchor and backing away, but something about the whole thing felt like moving would make it worse. I just gripped the sides of the boat and tried to stay steady. The light below the surface grew brighter. Not fast, just a steady increase, like someone slowly turning a dimmer switch. It had a bluish tint, pale and cold looking, and it made the water around it seem almost clear. I found myself leaning forward again without even realizing it. The brightness grew until I could see the silhouette of the anchor rope drifting in it. The rope seemed to glow around the edges, like the light was bending around it. I'd never seen anything underwater glow like that. My first thought was phosphorescence, like plankton or algae, but this was too focused, too controlled, and it wasn't moving with the current. It was staying perfectly centered right beneath the bow. The ripples stopped suddenly. One moment they were spreading, and the next the water went completely flat, so smooth it looked like glass. The light stayed steady and bright. I held my breath without meaning to. Then, just for a second, something passed between the light and the surface. A shadow. Not a clear shape, not something I could describe, but something with depth. Something that shouldn't have been that close to the surface without breaking it. The shadow drifted sideways and vanished. The light flared a little brighter. Then it went out. Not faded, not dimmed. It cut out instantly, like someone flipped a switch. The darkness hit so fast I nearly fell backward. My lantern flickered again, and for a moment I thought it was going to go out too. I unhooked it and held it up over the side, trying to see into the water, but there was nothing. Just black lake stretching out in every direction. Perfectly calm, no ripples, no disturbance. The anchor rope hung straight down, unmoving. Whatever had been underneath the boat had left no trace at all. I waited, listening, but the lake was completely silent again. I started pulling up the anchor. I wasn't going to stay there any longer. The rope felt normal in my hands, rough and cold and wet, but when I reached the anchor itself, the metal was warm. Not warm from friction or sunlight. It was warm in a way that made no sense, like it had been sitting near a heater. I dropped it onto the deck and just stared at it for a minute. The sky was lightening around the edges now, and the faintest bit of real color was hitting the water. I started the motor and headed back toward the dock, keeping my eyes on the lake around me the whole time. Nothing else happened on the ride back. No more ripples. No light. Just the normal sound of the motor and the faint breeze that should have been there all along. When I reached the dock, I tied up the boat and stood there for a while, watching the water. The first birds of the morning were starting to chirp, and it was like someone had pressed play on the world again. I checked the anchor once more. Still warm. By the time I loaded the boat onto the trailer and drove home, it had cooled off like nothing was ever strange about it. I went back to Cedar Hollow the next morning, mostly to see if anything felt different. The lake was normal, busy with insects, fish jumping, all of it. But there was one thing I noticed the second I cut the motor and drifted near the East Cove. The water there was colder. Not freezing, but noticeably colder than the rest of the lake. When I let my hand hang over the side, I could feel the temperature shift like I'd reached into a spring. I moved around with the boat for a while, checking other spots out of curiosity. Everywhere else felt normal. Only that one spot, the exact place the light had been, felt wrong. I haven't fished in that spot since. I still go out on the lake all the time, but I stay closer to the west end now. And every time I catch myself drifting near the cove, I correct course without even deciding to. The lake looks the same. Sounds the same. But I can't shake the feeling that something down there was watching me long before the light ever appeared. The phone flashlight was already on when I opened my eyes, pointed straight up at the ceiling like someone had set it that way on purpose. The beam sprayed a pale circle across the plaster, and right in the middle of it was a darker round patch, just faint enough that I might not have noticed it if the light wasn't aimed there. I lay still for a second, trying to figure out when I'd turned it on. I always plugged my phone in on the nightstand, screen face down. I never used the flashlight in bed. My first thought was I'd rolled over on it in my sleep, but it wasn't lying flat. It stood propped against the edge of my alarm clock, angled neatly upward, too carefully positioned to be an accident. The room felt warmer than it should have. It was late fall in Duluth, the kind of chilly morning where the air always smelled faintly wet, even through closed windows. I'd left a cracked window open overnight without meaning to, and fog pressed heavily against the glass, blurring the alley lights below. The circular mark on the ceiling looked like a faint shadow that didn't match anything else in the room. I sat up slowly and reached out to grab the phone. It was warm. Not hot, but warmer than a phone should feel after sitting unused for hours. When I turned off the flashlight, the mark was still visible, a perfect soft circle about the size of a dinner plate. I touched it with my fingertips, expecting dust or peel or something obvious. The spot felt slightly warm under my skin. I pulled my hand back and frowned up at it, pressing again just to be sure I wasn't imagining it. The rest of the ceiling felt cold and rough. Only that one spot held any trace of heat. "Okay," I muttered quietly, my voice dry. I looked around the room. Nothing else seemed out of place. My jeans still sat slung over the chair. My boots were by the door. The tiny digital clock on the stove across the room read 5:38 a.m. I was alone. I lived alone. No one else had a key except my sister, and she lived 2 towns over and had a newborn. Showing up at my place before sunrise with no warning didn't make sense. I eased out of bed and walked over to the small stepladder I kept for storage shelves. The wood creaked under my bare feet. Climbing up, I held my palm close to the mark again. It was still warm. No scorch, no smell, no residue. Just heat, as if something round and hot had been held against it for a few seconds, then removed. I pressed my whole hand flat this time. The warmth sunk through my skin and made my fingers tingle slightly. A low vibration brushed the air, so subtle I almost missed it, like the hum of a distant appliance that wasn't actually running. I hopped down and unplugged my phone, watching for any odd notifications. No missed calls, no open apps. No sign that the flashlight had even been on longer than a few minutes. When I tried to remember falling asleep, the details felt smeared. I knew I'd been restless. I remembered scrolling through old photos of my coworker Morgan's dog. I remembered rolling onto my side. That was it. No memory of switching on the light. No memory of moving my phone. Outside, the fog pressed thicker against the window, dulling the street lamp below into a foggy halo. I stared out for a moment and noticed the glow reflected faintly on the glass, pulsing so lightly I couldn't be sure it was real. I pulled my gaze back to the ceiling just as the faint hum dipped again, barely audible. The warm circle began to fade, the heat softening until it matched the rest of the ceiling temperature. I dressed quickly, tugging on a sweater and heavy socks, still uneasy. When I opened my bedroom door and stepped into the tiny hallway, I noticed the air felt off, not cold, not warm, just strangely flat. My kitchen lights flicked once as I walked past them, even though I hadn't turned them on. Great, I murmured, rubbing my face. I poured coffee, nerves tight and shaky in my chest, and carried the mug back toward the bedroom, keeping an eye on the ceiling mark. It was still there, faint as if someone had gently erased it. My phone vibrated suddenly, making me jump. No call. Just a motion alert from the cheap security cam I kept pointed at the alley window, mostly for peace of mind.